The ship they said could not sink. Tonight, before sleep quietly finds you, imagine that the world is still wrapped in coal smoke instead of jet trails. The loudest machines on Earth are powered by steam. Crossing an ocean is not something measured in hours, but in days, and leaving Europe for America feels less like boarding transportation and more like stepping into another life entirely. Now picture yourself standing on a cold dock in April of 1912. The air smells of salt, wet rope, fresh paint, machine oil, and coal dust. Porters shout over one another as carts rattle across stone streets. Horses pull wagons stacked with luggage that looks heavy enough to contain someone's entire existence. Families embrace a little longer than usual. Children stare at a ship so enormous that their necks begin to ache. Above them all rises Titanic. Even today, after more than a century of engineering miracles, photographs hardly prepare you for her scale. She stretches almost 900 feet from bow to stern, longer than many city blocks, taller than most buildings nearby, and crowned with 4 enormous funnels that seem determined to challenge the clouds themselves. She does not simply sit in the harbor. She dominates it. The sea itself appears to have made room. People stop talking when they first see her, not because they are frightened, but because there are moments when human ambition becomes so visible that language briefly fails. Titanic was one of those moments. And yet, as beautiful as she was, as expensive, as celebrated, as carefully engineered, every single person looking up at her had absolutely no idea they were witnessing one of history's most famous endings before it had even begun. That is perhaps the strangest thing about disasters. They rarely announce themselves. History, despite what movies suggest, almost never plays ominous music beforehand. No invisible narrator whispers, "This is the last peaceful afternoon." People laugh. They eat lunch. Someone complains about the weather. Someone misplaces a suitcase. Someone falls in love. Someone writes a letter they'll never finish. Life continues exactly as normal, right until it doesn't. The story of Titanic has become so familiar that it is easy to forget she existed before becoming a tragedy. Today, her name instantly calls to mind freezing water, lifeboats, an iceberg drifting beneath moonlight, and perhaps an orchestra refusing to stop playing. But before all of that, Titanic represented hope. She represented confidence. She represented an age convinced that science, industry, wealth, and determination could solve nearly every problem humanity had ever faced. The early 20th century was, in many ways, astonishingly optimistic. Electric lights were replacing gas lamps. Telephones connected voices across cities. Automobiles rattled through streets once ruled entirely by horses. Airplanes had only recently proven that humans could fly, and every year engineers seemed determined to accomplish something even more impossible than the year before. There was a peculiar confidence in the air. People genuinely believed tomorrow would always be larger, faster, richer, cleaner, and smarter than today. Progress had become something close to a religion. Factories multiplied. Railroads stitched continents together. Steel towers climbed into city skylines. Ocean liners grew larger every decade, each company attempting to outdo the last. Because if your ship was bigger, it must surely be better. That, at least, was the logic. Human beings have always enjoyed making things unnecessarily enormous. The pyramids, the Great Wall, cathedrals reaching toward heaven, modern skyscrapers. Apparently, someone in every generation eventually says, "You know what this needs? It should be much bigger." And usually everyone nods enthusiastically. The North Atlantic had become the world's busiest highway. Every week, thousands of immigrants left Europe behind, carrying little more than hope folded inside battered suitcases. Meanwhile, wealthy industrialists crossed the same ocean surrounded by silver dining sets, fine wines, orchestras, libraries, and enough luxury to make certain royal palaces seem slightly underdecorated. One ocean. Two completely different worlds. Both happened to be sailing aboard the same ships. Shipping companies understood this perfectly. Ocean liners were businesses before they were symbols. Every cabin represented income. Every passenger represented opportunity. Every successful crossing built prestige. Competition became fierce. Among the greatest rivals stood 2 British companies whose names dominated Atlantic travel. One was the Cunard Line. The other was the White Star Line. Their competition shaped an entire era. Cunard pursued speed. Their ships chased records. Each crossing became another opportunity to shave precious hours off the voyage between Europe and America. Winning the Blue Ribbon, the unofficial prize for the fastest Atlantic crossing, brought tremendous publicity. Fast ships attracted passengers. Passengers meant profit. White Star, however, chose another path. Instead of building the quickest vessels, they would build the most luxurious. Instead of racing, they would impress. Instead of asking passengers how quickly they wished to arrive, they asked how comfortably they wished to travel. It was an entirely different philosophy. Imagine checking into a floating Grand Hotel instead of simply boarding transportation. That became White Star's vision. Comfort, elegance, grandeur. Titanic would embody every one of those ideas. But before Titanic herself existed, there was another story unfolding quietly across Europe. Millions were leaving. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed one of the largest migrations in human history. Entire villages emptied. Young couples dreamed of America. Farm workers hoped for factory jobs. Families escaped poverty, persecution, or simply the certainty that life elsewhere might be slightly kinder. The Atlantic became less an ocean than a bridge connecting old lives with imagined futures. For third-class passengers, Titanic represented possibility. Their cabins were modest, their meals simple. Yet compared to many earlier immigrant ships, the accommodations bordered on astonishing luxury. Clean bedding, fresh food, running water, ventilation, medical inspections, separate dining spaces. By 1912 standards, this was genuinely impressive. Not because life in third class was glamorous. It wasn't. But because millions before them had crossed under conditions far worse. Meanwhile, first-class passengers occupied another universe entirely. Walking through the upper decks felt like entering London's finest hotels. There were grand staircases crafted from polished oak, glass domes flooded hallways with sunlight, Turkish baths, reading rooms, palm courts, smoking lounges, restaurants serving elaborate multi-course dinners, suites rivaling expensive apartments. One could almost forget entirely that the floor beneath one's feet happened to be floating several thousand feet above the ocean floor. It is remarkable how quickly humans adapt to luxury. Give someone enough polished wood, warm carpets, attentive servants, and excellent food, and eventually they begin complaining that the tea arrived slightly cooler than expected. Civilization has always been wonderfully consistent in that regard. Yet beneath the carpets, below the crystal chandeliers, far underneath elegant conversation and polished silverware, another world existed. The engine rooms. If first class resembled a palace, the boiler rooms resembled another planet. Imagine unbearable heat. Imagine darkness interrupted only by furnace doors bursting open in violent flashes of orange. Imagine hundreds of men stripped nearly to the waist, faces blackened with coal dust, muscles aching after hours of relentless labor. These firemen, or stokers, fed coal into enormous boilers every few seconds. Each shovelful disappeared into roaring flames capable of turning water into the steam that powered Titanic's gigantic engines. The ship's elegance depended entirely upon invisible exhaustion. Passengers above admired smooth carpets. Workers below shoveled mountains. That contrast existed everywhere aboard Titanic. Above, music. Below, machinery. Above, champagne. Below, coal. Above, dreams. Below, discipline. Perhaps every civilization works this way. We often notice the beautiful surface while overlooking the countless ordinary people quietly keeping everything alive beneath it. Titanic herself became possible because thousands of laborers spent years shaping steel, driving rivets, hauling materials, and solving engineering problems invisible to future passengers. Visitors admired the finished masterpiece. Few ever thought about the hands that built it. History frequently remembers owners. It should perhaps remember workers just as often. And in Belfast, those workers had already begun creating something the world had never seen before. Long before passengers packed elegant dresses or carefully folded immigration papers. Before orchestras rehearsed. Before captains reviewed navigation charts. before icebergs drifted south from Greenland. The story had begun with hammers, with rivets, with sparks, with steel, with men standing hundreds of feet above the ground balancing upon skeletal frameworks, while giant cranes slowly lifted impossible weights into place. No one building Titanic imagined they were constructing an icon of tragedy. They believed they were building the future. Perhaps that is why history remains endlessly fascinating. The people inside it rarely know which moments future generations will remember forever. The blacksmith does not know he is forging a legendary sword. The mason does not know his wall will survive 1,000 years. The sailor does not know this voyage will fill books, documentaries, museums, songs, arguments, myths, and conversations more than a century later. They simply wake up, go to work, live ordinary days. History only becomes history afterward. And so, while the world admired technological progress and celebrated an age of seemingly limitless confidence, enormous construction yards echoed with the rhythmic music of industry. Steel struck steel. Steam hissed. Cranes groaned. Thousands of workers labored beneath northern Irish skies. Piece by piece, beam by beam, rivet by rivet, the greatest passenger liner the world had ever imagined slowly emerged from the earth itself. Not yet famous, not yet doomed. Simply unfinished. Waiting. Belfast builds a giant. If you could quietly drift backward through time and arrive in Belfast around 1909, the first thing you would notice probably wouldn't be the ship. It would be the sound. Not one sound, but thousands. Steel plates crashing into place. Steam whistles echoing across the harbor. The rhythmic clanging of hammers striking glowing rivets. The squeal of cranes lifting impossible weights into the gray Irish sky. Men shouting instructions that vanished into the constant roar of industry. Even before sunrise, the city seemed awake. Not because everyone wanted to be, because work began early, and ships the size of mountains refused to build themselves. Belfast at the beginning of the 20th century was one of the busiest industrial cities in the British Empire. Linen mills hummed day and night. Rope factories twisted endless lengths of hemp. Foundries poured molten metal into molds. Rail lines crisscrossed the city like veins carrying lifeblood to every workshop and warehouse. But towering above everything else stood the Harland and Wolff shipyard. It wasn't merely a workplace. It was a city inside another city. More than 15,000 people worked there. Engineers, draftsmen, riveters, blacksmiths, carpenters, electricians, boilermakers, painters, laborers, clerks, crane operators, and apprentices all moved with remarkable coordination, like tiny parts inside an unimaginably large machine. From a distance, the shipyard resembled an iron forest. Steel frameworks reached toward the clouds. Massive cranes glided silently overhead. Scaffolding climbed higher than church towers. Coal smoke drifted lazily across the skyline, softening the edges of everything until the entire place appeared wrapped inside a permanent gray haze. It was not beautiful in the traditional sense. It was loud, dirty, dangerous, yet strangely magnificent. If cathedrals represented humanity's devotion to God, shipyards represented humanity's devotion to engineering. And this particular cathedral happened to worship steel. The men who worked here were not celebrities. Very few of their names survive in history books. Yet without them, there would never have been a Titanic. Most arrived before dawn, carrying simple lunches packed by wives or mothers. Thick slices of bread, cheese, perhaps cold meat if fortunes were favorable. Tea poured into sturdy containers that rarely stayed warm for long. By 6 in the morning, the yard was alive. Work continued in every kind of weather. Rain-soaked clothing. Winter winds numbed fingers. Summer sun reflected harshly from bare steel until the entire hull shimmered with heat. No one received medals for enduring these conditions. They simply called it Tuesday. The shipyard had built impressive vessels before, but Titanic and her sister ship Olympic represented something entirely different. They were almost unimaginably large. Each steel plate had to fit perfectly. Each beam had to support enormous weight. Each measurement mattered. A mistake of an inch in one section could become several inches farther along, and on a ship nearly 900 feet long, small errors had an unpleasant habit of becoming very large problems. Thankfully, engineers tend to dislike unpleasant surprises. At least the competent ones do. The mastermind behind much of this ambition was Thomas Andrews. Unlike some industrial leaders who preferred comfortable offices and clean suits, Andrews frequently walked the shipyard itself. He knew workers by name. He climbed through unfinished compartments. He inspected details personally. He listened. This earned him something rather valuable: respect. Andrews was not interested in building merely a large ship. He wanted to build the finest passenger liner the world had ever known. That distinction mattered. Large was easy. Excellent was difficult. Every staircase, every cabin, every ventilation duct, every pipe, every dining room, every electrical wire required careful thought. Nothing aboard Titanic happened by accident. Even elegance demanded engineering, especially elegance. The famous grand staircase, for example, would eventually become one of the most recognizable interiors ever built. Passengers would admire polished oak paneling, wrought iron balustrades, carved decorations, and a magnificent glass dome overhead. Few would consider the structural calculations hidden behind all that beauty. Beauty often disguises astonishing mathematics. Somehow humanity has always managed to hide complicated engineering beneath attractive surfaces. Bridges, cathedrals, wristwatches, smartphones, ships. Apparently we enjoy pretending impossible things simply happen naturally. The reality is usually thousands of exhausted people solving one problem after another. Titanic's hull alone required over 3 million rivets. 3 million. Pause for a moment and imagine placing 3 million tiny pieces of metal by hand. Now imagine doing it while balanced high above the ground, surrounded by noise loud enough to drown ordinary conversation. Riveting teams worked in coordinated groups. One worker heated rivets until they glowed bright orange. Another tossed them through the air. Yes, actually threw them. A catcher, wearing thick gloves, caught the blazing metal in a small bucket or can. The rivet was inserted into prepared holes. Then several men hammered both ends into shape before the metal cooled. Timing mattered. Too slow, and the rivet hardened before sealing properly. Too fast, and mistakes happened. The process resembled an industrial dance. Dangerous, precise, endlessly repetitive. Accidents occurred frequently. Falling tools, burns, crushed fingers, broken bones, sometimes worse. Industrial safety in 1909 was, shall we say, optimistic. Hard hats were uncommon. Protective equipment was limited. Many dangers were accepted as simply part of earning a living. Workers climbed astonishing heights carrying heavy tools while trusting little more than balance and experience. One misstep could end everything. Yet each morning they returned. Not because they enjoyed risk, because families depended on wages. History often celebrates magnificent achievements while quietly overlooking the price paid by ordinary laborers. Titanic was no exception. As her skeleton gradually expanded, people throughout Belfast stopped to watch. Children pointed upward. Visitors stood along fences staring in amazement. Even experienced shipbuilders occasionally paused. The vessel grew so large that familiar points of reference disappeared. Standing beside her unfinished hull made grown men feel unexpectedly small. The ship was becoming less an object than a landscape. Walking from bow to stern took several minutes. Entire neighborhoods could have fit inside her. Well, almost. The scale remained astonishing regardless. One fascinating challenge involved launching her. People often imagine ships being built directly in the water. Titanic wasn't. She was assembled on land. Eventually, the completed hull would have to slide into Belfast Lock using carefully prepared launchways coated with special lubricants. Imagine pushing a 46,000-ton building into the sea. Slowly, carefully, without allowing it to become history's largest accidental sled. Planning such an event required extraordinary precision. Thousands gathered on launch day in May 1911. There were no dramatic speeches. No champagne bottle smashing against the bow. White Star traditionally skipped that ceremony. Perhaps they considered it unnecessary. Perhaps someone simply disliked cleaning broken glass. Instead, workers quietly removed supporting timbers. Gravity took over. Slowly at first, then faster. Titanic began moving. The enormous hull slid gracefully toward the water. Massive clouds of smoke and dust erupted from beneath her. Greased launchways groaned. Chains strained. Spectators watched in near silence. Within just over a minute, the hull entered the water. The harbor responded with a tremendous surge. Waves rolled outward. Tugboats stood ready. The impossible had become real. Titanic floated. Not yet complete. Not yet carrying passengers. But alive in a sense. Ships often seem strangely human. They are born, named, launched, given identities, referred to as she. They travel, age, sometimes disappear. Perhaps that explains why shipwrecks continue to fascinate us. They feel less like machines failing than companions being lost. After launching came months of fitting out. This stage lacked the drama of construction, but required just as much patience. Furniture arrived. Electrical systems were installed. Miles of carpeting stretched across polished floors. Cabins received beds. Dining rooms acquired tables. Elevators were tested. Thousands of light bulbs illuminated spaces that had previously existed only inside architectural drawings. Even the smallest details received attention. China bearing the White Star emblem. Silver cutlery. Crystal glasses. Fresh linens. Artwork. Clocks. Mirrors. Every object contributed to an experience carefully designed to impress passengers the moment they stepped aboard. Luxury, after all, often hides inside details rather than extravagance. Meanwhile, below decks, engineers assembled engines so enormous they seemed capable of powering entire towns. Titanic combined two massive reciprocating steam engines with a central steam turbine. The machinery occupied several decks. Connecting rods rose and fell with hypnotic rhythm during testing. Pipes carried steam under tremendous pressure. Everything depended upon coordination. One small mechanical failure could affect systems throughout the ship. It was engineering on an almost orchestral scale. Every component had its own part to play, and every note needed to arrive at precisely the right moment. When completed, Titanic possessed comforts few hotels could match. Electric lighting throughout. Central heating. Freshwater systems. Wireless telegraphy. A swimming pool. A gymnasium. Turkish baths. Squash court. Elegant restaurants. Cafes. Reading rooms. Smoking lounges. Private promenades. It was less a ship than a floating city. Or perhaps a floating illusion. Because despite all the elegance, despite all the steel, despite every careful calculation, Titanic remained subject to the same ancient ocean that had humbled sailors for thousands of years. The Atlantic did not care about polished staircases. Icebergs did not admire craftsmanship. Cold water remained cold. Gravity remained patient. Nature has always possessed a quiet confidence. It rarely argues. It simply waits. And sometimes, it reminds humanity that progress, while remarkable, never entirely replaces humility. Still, none of that occupied the minds of workers as finishing touches continued. For them, the ship represented accomplishment, employment, pride. Many would bring wives or children to glimpse the nearly completed liner from across the harbor. There, they might quietly say, "I helped build that." Imagine the satisfaction. To spend years creating something so enormous that strangers traveled from distant countries merely to see it. To know your hands helped shape history, even if history would remember someone else's name. By early 1912, Titanic stood complete. Her black hull gleamed beneath fresh paint. Her white superstructure caught the pale spring sunlight. For towering funnels dominated the skyline. She looked calm, powerful, almost serene, like a great sleeping animal waiting for its first journey. Soon inspectors would arrive. The crew would begin preparing. Passengers would purchase tickets. Coal would fill her bunkers. Food would stock her kitchens. Letters would be written. Suitcases packed. Goodbyes exchanged. The greatest voyage of the age was almost ready to begin. No one, not the engineers, not the workers, not Thomas Andrews, not the officers, and certainly not the passengers, could know that the masterpiece they had spent years creating would exist for only 5 days at sea before becoming one of the most enduring legends in history. The men who believed they had built the future. By the spring of 1912, Titanic no longer belonged to the shipyard. For nearly 3 years, she had existed as Belfast's greatest construction project, a towering skeleton of steel that slowly transformed into the largest passenger liner ever completed. The men who had climbed her scaffolding, hammered her rivets, and crawled through her narrow machinery spaces were beginning to step away. Their work was finished. Now the ship belonged to the sea. It is a strangely emotional moment whenever a creator lets go of something enormous. Architects eventually hand over buildings they may never enter again. Engineers watch bridges open to traffic. Writers close the final page of a manuscript knowing it no longer belongs entirely to them. Ships are no different. Some workers lingered along the docks simply to look at her. Not because they needed to, because they wanted to. Imagine spending years helping create something so vast that it changes the skyline of your city, and then watching strangers arrive to admire it without realizing how many anonymous hands made it possible. There is a quiet dignity in anonymous craftsmanship. History rarely remembers the riveter who drove the last bolt into place, or the carpenter who polished the final section of handrail, or the electrician who connected the last light fixture. Yet without them, there is no history at all. Titanic passed her sea trials on the 2nd day of April, 1912. The weather was unusually kind. A cool breeze crossed the Irish Sea as officers, engineers, inspectors, and representatives from the Board of Trade climbed aboard. Tugboats gently guided the massive liner away from Belfast, and for the first time, she began moving under her own power. This was not yet her famous voyage. It was an examination. Every ship had to prove herself before carrying paying passengers. The engines were gradually increased in speed. The rudder was tested. Emergency stops were practiced. Navigation equipment inspected. Wireless systems checked. Anchors lowered and raised. Turning circles measured. Every important mechanical system received careful attention, or at least as careful as one could reasonably expect in a single day. Titanic performed beautifully. Her enormous engines ran smoothly. Her steering responded predictably. Observers expressed satisfaction. Certificates were signed. Approval granted. The world's newest ocean liner officially entered service. If anyone aboard felt nervous, they gave little indication. Why would they? Everything appeared exactly as intended. From a purely engineering perspective, Titanic was a remarkable success. People often misunderstand the phrase unsinkable. Contrary to popular myth, the White Star Line did not plaster giant advertisements everywhere proclaiming Titanic absolutely could not sink. The word became attached to her largely through newspapers and enthusiastic public conversation after experts praised her advanced safety features. She was considered extraordinarily safe. And to be fair, she was. Titanic possessed 16 major watertight compartments separated by steel bulkheads. If one or even several sections flooded, massive watertight doors could be closed to isolate the damage. The ship was designed to remain afloat with multiple flooded compartments. Compared with earlier liners, this represented genuine progress. It was not foolish engineering. It was impressive engineering. The tragedy lay in the fact that nature eventually found a combination no one had fully anticipated. History is filled with inventions that worked brilliantly, until they encountered the one situation their designers never imagined. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, another man prepared for an entirely different journey. Captain Edward John Smith was 62 years old. He had spent decades at sea. His beard had become almost as famous as the ships he commanded. Passengers trusted him. Crew respected him. Within the White Star Line, Smith had earned a reputation for calm professionalism. He was not loud. He was not theatrical. He simply inspired confidence. There are some people who walk into a room and immediately seem capable of solving problems. Captain Smith was one of them. He had commanded Olympic, Titanic's older sister, and was selected to lead the maiden voyage of the company's newest flagship. Many believe this would be his final command before retirement. If so, it seemed a fitting farewell. Guide the greatest ship in the world across the Atlantic. Arrive in New York. Accept congratulations. Retire with honor. A perfect ending. History, unfortunately, has always displayed an unfortunate tendency to ignore perfect endings. Joining Smith aboard was chief designer Thomas Andrews. Unlike most designers, Andrews insisted on sailing during a ship's maiden voyage. He wanted to observe, to learn, to identify improvements for future vessels. It demonstrated remarkable dedication. Most architects do not personally accompany every building after completion, but Andrews believed ships could always become better. His notebook reportedly remained close at hand. He noticed details, minor inconveniences, furniture placement, passenger comfort, small improvements invisible to everyone else. He remained, even after years of construction, a student of his own creation. Then there was Joseph Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line. His presence aboard attracted attention. Some viewed him as the public face of the company. Others considered him an ambitious businessman eager to showcase his newest achievement. Over the decades, opinions about Ismay would become deeply divided. Some condemned him, others defended him. History can be remarkably unforgiving toward survivors, especially famous ones. The crew also began arriving. Nearly 900 officers, sailors, engineers, stewards, cooks, cleaners, musicians, postal clerks, and firemen would operate Titanic. Each had responsibilities so specific that the vessel functioned almost like a living organism. On the bridge, officers studied charts. In boiler rooms, stokers shoveled coal around the clock. Stewards prepared cabins. Chefs planned meals. Bakers mixed dough before sunrise. Laundry workers sorted endless piles of linens. Postal clerks organized thousands of letters. Musicians unpacked instruments. Every day at sea required astonishing coordination. Passengers often noticed service. They rarely noticed logistics. Yet logistics quietly determine whether civilization functions. By early April, Southampton buzzed with anticipation. England's great southern port had witnessed countless departures, but this one felt different. Newspapers covered the event extensively. Hotels filled with travelers. Carriages crowded narrow streets. Dockworkers hurried between warehouses. Telegraph messages arrived constantly. Fresh food poured into the harbor district. The shopping list alone bordered on absurd. Tons of meat. Thousands of eggs. Fresh vegetables. Butter. Milk. Tea. Coffee. Wine. Beer. Mineral water. Flour. Sugar. Fruit. Fish. Oysters. Ice cream ingredients, and enough potatoes to satisfy what may have been the world's most ambitious floating kitchen. One almost feels sympathy for the chefs. Imagine preparing breakfast for over 2,000 people while crossing the Atlantic. Without modern refrigeration, without grocery delivery, without the comforting knowledge that you could simply order takeout if everything went terribly wrong. Cooking aboard Titanic required military precision. Every loaf of bread, every soup, every roast, every dessert, everything had to be carefully planned before departure. There would be no stopping midway because someone forgot the onions. Meanwhile, passengers slowly trickled into Southampton. Some arrived in elegant motor cars, others by train. Many carried trunks larger than modern refrigerators. Servants followed wealthy families loaded with hats, dresses, evening clothes, walking sticks, jewelry cases, books, medicines, and enough luggage to suggest they intended to relocate rather than vacation. For first-class passengers, crossing the Atlantic was often simply another chapter in an already comfortable life. For others, especially immigrants in third class, the voyage represented something entirely different. Many carried almost everything they owned. One suitcase, one wooden trunk, a family Bible, photographs, letters, perhaps a few carefully wrapped heirlooms. Objects too precious to leave behind. Everything else remained in Europe. Forever. It is difficult to imagine the mixture of emotions. Excitement, fear, hope, homesickness before even leaving home. Children likely understood only fragments of the journey. Adults understood far too much. Some knew they might never again see the villages where they had grown up. Parents, brothers, sisters, friends. Entire lives would soon exist only in memory. The Atlantic, after all, was not merely an ocean. It separated old identities from new beginnings. On the docks, these different worlds stood only a few hundred feet apart. Millionaires discussing investment opportunities. Factory workers searching for better wages. Newlyweds dreaming of America. Businessmen reading newspapers. Musicians laughing together. Children chasing pigeons. Dockworkers shouting instructions. Porters wrestling impossible mountains of luggage. No one knew they were participating in one of history's most carefully photographed final ordinary days. There is something haunting about ordinary moments preserved forever. A smiling family posing beside a trunk. A gentleman adjusting his hat. A child waving. Nothing appears unusual. Nothing suggests catastrophe. That is because catastrophe had not yet arrived. Life remained wonderfully, stubbornly normal. As evening settled over Southampton, Titanic rested quietly against the dock. Her lights reflected across dark water. Smoke drifted gently from her funnels. Crew members completed final inspections. Passengers found hotels or stayed aboard if permitted. Some likely walked the decks, admiring the harbor illuminated beneath scattered lamps. Perhaps they wondered what New York would look like. Perhaps they thought about business meetings, or relatives waiting across the ocean, or simply whether tomorrow's weather would remain pleasant. Few people spend the night before history changes thinking about history. They think about breakfast, or sleep, or whether they remembered to pack enough socks. Tomorrow would be April 10th, 1912, the day Titanic finally welcomed her passengers. The day ropes would be cast off. The day whistles would echo across Southampton water. The day the greatest passenger liner ever built would begin the voyage that was meant to announce a new era of luxury and confidence. Instead, it would begin one of the most unforgettable stories the sea has ever told. The morning the world came aboard. Morning arrived over Southampton with the hesitant light of an English spring. The sky was pale rather than brilliant, washed in soft shades of silver and blue, and a cool breeze drifted in from the Solent, carrying the familiar smell of salt water, coal smoke, damp timber, and fresh paint. It was the sort of morning that seemed entirely ordinary to those living through it. Looking back, of course, history has a way of placing a golden frame around such days. The date was Wednesday, April 10th, 1912. The Titanic's maiden voyage was finally beginning. Long before most passengers appeared, the docks were already alive. Porters hurried along the quays balancing impossible towers of luggage on handcarts whose wheels rattled loudly over uneven stone. Horses pulled wagons loaded with crates marked for the ship's kitchens. Dock workers shouted over the hiss of steam escaping from nearby machinery. Seagulls circled overhead, occasionally crying out as though they alone understood that the harbor would soon become much quieter. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency. Fresh vegetables disappeared into storerooms. Barrels of flour rolled below deck. Crates of wine vanished into carefully organized cellars. Blocks of ice were lowered into refrigerated compartments. Fresh flowers, ordered for the first-class dining saloon and luxurious suites, were carefully arranged. Newspapers arrived. Mailbags were loaded. Coal continued to pour into the bunkers beneath the ship, coating everyone nearby with a fine layer of black dust that no amount of brushing could completely remove. Titanic was becoming a floating city, and every city needs supplies. Thousands of eggs, hundreds of pounds of butter, fresh beef, lamb, fish, game birds, coffee, tea, chocolate, cheese, milk, cream, fresh fruit, vegetables. Enough bread to feed a small town. The kitchens beneath the elegant dining rooms looked less like restaurant kitchens and more like industrial factories devoted entirely to satisfying human appetites. Because even aboard the grandest ship in the world, someone would still complain if breakfast was late. Human nature has always remained wonderfully dependable. As preparations continued, passengers gradually began arriving. Some came in elegant automobiles whose polished bodies gleamed beneath the morning sun. Chauffeurs opened doors with quiet precision, while liveried servants lifted expensive trunks bearing labels from London, Paris, Rome, Cairo, and New York. Others stepped down from trains carrying only modest suitcases. Third-class passengers often traveled in family groups. Parents kept close watch over children who stared wide-eyed at the enormous ship. For many, this was their first glimpse of the ocean. And what a first glimpse it was. Titanic did not merely dominate the dock. She seemed to dominate reality itself. Her black hull stretched so far that from certain angles the bow disappeared into morning mist while the stern remained brilliantly illuminated by sunlight. Her white superstructure climbed deck after deck toward four towering funnels painted in the White Star Line's distinctive buff color with black tops. The vessel seemed almost too large to comprehend. People instinctively stopped walking simply to stare. Even today, photographs cannot fully convey her scale. Imagine standing beside a 15-story building laid gently upon its side and somehow floating effortlessly upon water. That was roughly the impression she created. Children pointed upward. Adults removed hats. Conversations paused. The excitement was contagious. Reporters wandered among the crowds, gathering observations for afternoon newspapers. Photographers adjusted cumbersome cameras mounted upon sturdy tripods. Vendors sold newspapers announcing the departure of the world's greatest liner. There was an unmistakable feeling that something important was happening. Not tragic, not ominous, simply important. The world had entered an age that genuinely believed tomorrow would always surpass yesterday. Titanic embodied that belief better than perhaps any object ever created. At the gangways, boarding began. The first-class entrance resembled the lobby of an exclusive hotel. Stewards greeted passengers politely, checked tickets, and directed them toward luxurious accommodations. Uniformed crew members handled luggage with impressive efficiency. Everything appeared calm, orderly, civilized, exactly as the White Star Line intended. Among those boarding was John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in the world. His fortune seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Real estate, hotels, investments. His name was already legendary. Traveling with his young wife Madeline, Astor attracted considerable attention from both journalists and fellow passengers. Nearby boarded Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to one of America's great mining fortunes. Elegant, confident, impeccably dressed, he carried himself with the quiet assurance of someone accustomed to privilege. Then came Isidore Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store in New York, accompanied by his wife Ida. The couple had been married for over 40 years. Those who knew them often spoke of their extraordinary devotion to one another. Neither they nor anyone watching them could imagine how profoundly that devotion would soon be tested. Not every first-class passenger possessed enormous wealth. Some were writers, artists, doctors, business travelers, retired military officers, teachers, widows visiting family. The luxury of first class attracted many kinds of people, united less by profession than by their ability to afford the fare. Meanwhile, on different gangways entirely, second-class passengers quietly found their own accommodations. School teachers, clergy, engineers, merchants, middle-class families, tourists. Their cabins lacked the extravagant elegance of first class, but were remarkably comfortable by the standards of the day. Many later remarked that second class aboard Titanic exceeded first class on numerous smaller ships. It was an enviable place to travel. Then there was third class. History sometimes paints an unfair picture of steerage passengers, imagining only misery and overcrowding. Titanic challenged many of those expectations. Certainly, third class remained modest. Cabins were simple, bunks were narrow, privacy was limited. Yet compared to older immigrant ships, conditions represented genuine progress. Families occupied separate cabins rather than sleeping together in enormous communal dormitories. There were proper dining rooms, running water, electric lighting, ventilation, fresh food. It was hardly luxurious, but for many immigrants, it felt astonishingly comfortable. Most importantly, it represented hope. Around them flowed dozens of languages: English, Irish, Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, Italian, Arabic, German, French, Croatian, Armenian. Passengers from more than 30 countries stepped aboard carrying dreams remarkably similar despite speaking entirely different words. Some sought better jobs. Others hoped to join relatives already living in America. Young couples dreamed of raising children where opportunities seemed limitless. Older travelers wondered whether they would ever again see the villages disappearing behind them. One young boy reportedly carried a toy boat tucked safely inside his luggage. Another child refused to release her doll, clutching it tightly while staring up at the towering liner. Parents reassured frightened children that everything would be fine. And for the moment, they were absolutely correct. Elsewhere aboard, crew members hurried through countless final tasks. Stewards escorted passengers to cabins. Engineers completed machinery inspections. Officers reviewed departure procedures. Wireless operators checked equipment. Kitchen staff prepared luncheon. Musicians unpacked instruments. Coal trimmers continued moving fuel through dark bunkers deep beneath the ship. Above all of this activity stood Captain Edward Smith. Calm, measured, experienced. He moved about the ship with quiet confidence, greeting passengers politely while ensuring preparations remained on schedule. For him, this was another command. An important one, certainly, but not his first. He had spent decades facing Atlantic weather, mechanical problems, difficult schedules, and every ordinary challenge seafaring life could invent. Nothing about this morning suggested extraordinary danger. The weather remained favorable. The ship performed flawlessly. Crew members knew their duties. Passengers settled comfortably. Everything proceeded according to plan. Sometimes history's greatest tragedies begin with exceptional competence. At precisely noon, preparations reached their conclusion. Lines securing Titanic to the dock were made ready. Crowds gathered along the waterfront. Friends and relatives waved handkerchiefs. Children climbed onto shoulders for better views. Reporters sharpened pencils. Photographers adjusted lenses. The harbor seemed to pause. Then it came. Titanic's whistle. Deep, immense, powerful enough to vibrate through buildings and across the water. It echoed over Southampton like the voice of some enormous mechanical creature announcing its awakening. People stopped speaking. Even the gulls seemed briefly startled. The whistle sounded again. Ropes splashed into the water. Tugboats eased into position. Almost imperceptibly at first, Titanic began moving away from the dock. A gentle cheer rose from the crowd. Passengers lined the railings waving hats and handkerchiefs. Families shouted final farewells that quickly dissolved into distance. The world's largest passenger liner was underway. Yet within moments, something unexpected happened. As Titanic's enormous hull displaced water while moving through the harbor, it created tremendous suction. Nearby lay another ship, the SS New York, secured alongside the dock. Without warning, the smaller vessel began drifting. Its mooring line strained, then snapped. Suddenly, the New York swung toward Titanic. Crew members aboard both ships shouted warnings. Dockworkers ran frantically. Tugboats rushed forward at full power. For a few tense moments, it appeared the maiden voyage might end before leaving Southampton. Passengers leaned over railings watching the drama unfold below. Captain Smith reacted quickly. Engines reversed. Tugboats pushed desperately against the drifting vessel. At the last possible moment, disaster was avoided. The ships missed each other by only a few feet. An audible sigh seemed to pass through everyone watching. Some laughed nervously. Others shrugged. A close call, they likely thought. Nothing more. Looking backward, many later wondered whether this incident should have been interpreted as an omen. Humans possess a remarkable talent for discovering warning signs after events have already occurred. In truth, it was simply an accident. One successfully managed. The voyage continued. Slowly, Southampton slipped behind. The harbor grew smaller. Buildings softened into the distance. England itself gradually dissolved beneath the horizon. Ahead lay Cherbourg in France, then Queenstown in Ireland, then the vast Atlantic, then New York, or so everyone believed. The sea stretched calmly before them, glittering beneath the afternoon sun. The engines settled into their steady rhythm. The vibration beneath passengers' feet became almost comforting. Conversation resumed. Lunch was served. Children explored decks. Stewards carried luggage. Musicians tuned instruments. Life aboard Titanic had officially begun. No one, not the captain on the bridge, the engineers below, the millionaires strolling polished promenades, nor the immigrant families standing quietly at the stern watching Europe disappear, could possibly know that the most famous voyage in maritime history had just started its slow, graceful journey toward an iceberg drifting silently hundreds of miles away. The Atlantic, patient as always, was already waiting. A floating palace crosses the sea. By the afternoon of April 10, 1912, Southampton had faded into a gray line on the horizon. The English coast slowly disappeared behind a veil of mist until sea and sky blended together in soft shades of blue and silver. The excitement of departure gradually settled into something quieter. The whistles had stopped. The crowds were gone. The reporters remained behind on land. Now there was only the steady heartbeat of the ship herself. Far below the passengers' polished shoes, 3 gigantic propellers churned the cold water into endless ribbons of white foam. Massive pistons rose and fell inside the engine rooms with hypnotic precision. Steam hissed through pipes thicker than a man's torso. Every few seconds, another shovelful of coal disappeared into blazing furnaces. The entire ship vibrated almost imperceptibly. Not enough to disturb conversation. Just enough to remind everyone that nearly 50,000 tons of steel were somehow moving gracefully across the sea. It is one of engineering's quiet miracles. We often think of ships floating peacefully upon the water. In reality, thousands of tiny events happen every second to keep them alive. Valves open. Bearings turn. Boilers breathe. Engines pulse. Pumps circulate water. Generators produce electricity. Stewards carry trays. Cooks prepare meals. Officers calculate position. Each task seems insignificant on its own. Together, they become civilization. Titanic was, in many ways, an entire city that happened to drift across the Atlantic. Like every city, she had neighborhoods. First class occupied the upper world. Second class formed a comfortable middle. Third class stretched through lower decks toward the stern. Between them moved hundreds of crew members who somehow belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Passengers rarely noticed the invisible choreography surrounding them. That was precisely the point. Excellent service is often unnoticed. If a meal arrives on time, few people wonder about the kitchen. If fresh towels appear each morning, almost no one imagines the workers washing endless mountains of laundry below deck. Comfort has a peculiar habit of hiding effort. As afternoon turned toward evening, first-class passengers began exploring their floating palace. Many found themselves irresistibly drawn toward the grand staircase. Photographs have preserved its beauty, but they struggle to capture its atmosphere. Polished oak walls glowed warmly beneath electric lights. Delicate wrought iron railings curved elegantly upward. A magnificent glass dome allowed daylight to spill gently through the center of the ship. Above the staircase stood an ornate clock surrounded by carved woodwork. Its inscription read, "Honor and glory crowning time." It was an appropriately confident motto for the age. Time, after all, seemed firmly on humanity's side. Progress appeared unstoppable. Technology advanced every year. Empires stretched across continents. Industry produced wonders almost monthly. Surely the future belonged to people clever enough to build ships like this. As if history had not spent thousands of years gently reminding humanity to avoid becoming too confident. But history is patient. It waits. Near the staircase, elegantly dressed ladies admired the surroundings while gentlemen discussed politics, finance, and business. Fashion reflected the confidence of the Edwardian era. Women wore long flowing dresses with broad hats decorated by ribbons, feathers, and flowers. Gentlemen appeared in tailored suits, polished shoes, waistcoats, and neatly tied neckties. Even leisure possessed rules. Especially leisure. One did not simply wander into dinner wearing whatever happened to be comfortable. Civilized society demanded considerably more effort. Sometimes one suspects entire generations spent half their lives dressing for meals. Then again, perhaps they simply enjoyed looking impressive. There are certainly worse hobbies. Elsewhere aboard, children were considerably less interested in architecture. They discovered endless corridors, hidden corners, open decks, benches overlooking the sea. Every ship becomes an adventure if one happens to be 8 years old. Parents occasionally called after them. Stewards smiled politely. The children continued exploring anyway. Children possess a remarkable ability to ignore both danger and parental instructions with equal enthusiasm. On the promenade deck, passengers wrapped themselves in coats against the cool Atlantic breeze. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction. No buildings, no roads, no telephone poles, only water, for hours, then days. To modern travelers accustomed to constant connection, such isolation feels almost unimaginable. There was no internet, no satellite communication, no instant weather updates. Once the coastline disappeared, the outside world became strangely distant. News arrived only through wireless messages. Letters remained undelivered. Families back home could do nothing except wait. The Atlantic had always demanded patience. Meanwhile, below the glittering upper decks, another world continued its relentless rhythm. The boiler rooms remained unbearably hot. Even though the spring air outside remained cool, temperatures near the furnaces often climbed well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Firemen worked stripped to undershirts, faces streaked with black coal dust. Every few seconds, furnace doors burst open. Orange flames exploded into the darkness. Shovel scraped. Coal crashed. Sweat poured. There were 29 enormous boilers supplying steam to Titanic's engines. Keeping them fed required astonishing physical endurance. Hundreds of tons of coal disappeared every day. Every single piece had to be moved by human muscles, one shovel at a time. Imagine running a marathon inside an oven while lifting heavy rocks for 12 hours. That begins to approach the labor required. Passengers above sipped tea. Workers below shoveled mountains. Neither world could exist without the other. Farther forward lay the engine room itself. Here the atmosphere changed entirely. Instead of roaring furnaces, there was rhythm. Great connecting rods moved with almost hypnotic grace. Steel shafts rotated endlessly. Oil glistened beneath electric lights. Engineers walked narrow platforms, listening carefully. Experienced ears often detected problems before instruments did. A slightly unfamiliar vibration. An unusual clicking sound. A faint change in pressure. Machines speak quietly. Good engineers learn their language. Elsewhere, the wireless room buzzed with activity. This technology still felt almost magical. Invisible messages traveling through empty air. Passengers could send telegrams to family members thousands of miles away. Imagine explaining that idea to someone living only 50 years earlier. Words, without wires, crossing an ocean. It would have sounded like sorcery. The two Marconi operators aboard Titanic, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, remained extraordinarily busy. Passengers loved sending messages announcing their luxurious voyage. Having wonderful crossing. Weather excellent. See you Tuesday. Simple words. Ordinary messages. None yet understood how important wireless communication would soon become. By evening, Titanic approached the French port of Cherbourg. Unlike Southampton, Cherbourg lacked docks capable of accommodating such an enormous ship. Instead, smaller tenders ferried passengers and mail between shore and the waiting liner. As twilight settled across the harbor, lights flickered along the French coastline. Passengers stood at railings watching boats move back and forth beneath the fading sky. Some disembarked. Many boarded. Among the newcomers were several wealthy American families returning home after European holidays. Their luggage seemed almost capable of requiring its own passenger list. Late that night, Titanic departed once again. The lights of France gradually disappeared astern. Ahead waited Ireland. The following day dawned bright and calm. The Irish coast appeared beneath gentle morning sunshine as Titanic approached Queenstown, known today as Cove. This would be her final stop before crossing the open Atlantic. Here the atmosphere differed noticeably. Unlike Cherbourg, Queenstown's importance lay largely in immigration. Hundreds of Irish passengers waited anxiously to board. Many carried modest possessions. Small trunks, bundles wrapped in cloth, simple suitcases. Entire futures compressed into objects they could carry themselves. Families embraced one last time. Mothers cried quietly. Fathers attempted brave smiles. Children waved enthusiastically. Countless Irish families had already made this journey during previous decades. Now another generation prepared to follow. America represented possibility. Work, land, freedom, or at least the hope of those things. Hope has always been among humanity's most valuable possessions. Remarkably light to carry. Remarkably difficult to lose completely. As the final mailbags were loaded and the last passengers climbed aboard, Titanic prepared to leave Europe forever. The anchor was raised. Tenders moved away. Slowly, gracefully, the great ship turned toward the southwest. The Irish coastline began shrinking behind her. Soon, even the green hills faded into the distance. Now nothing remained ahead except nearly 2,000 miles of ocean. For the first time since leaving Southampton, Titanic was truly alone. The Atlantic spread endlessly before her. Cold, beautiful, ancient, unconcerned. Passengers settled comfortably into the routine of shipboard life. Breakfast, Morning walks, reading, conversation, lunch, deck games, afternoon tea, dinner, music, cards, sleep. The gentle rhythm of the engines beneath their feet soon became so familiar that many scarcely noticed it anymore. Routine is one of humanity's greatest comforts, even in the middle of an ocean. Especially in the middle of an ocean. Captain Smith maintained his daily schedule. Officers rotated watches on the bridge every 4 hours. Navigators carefully plotted the ship's position using sextants, chronometers, and celestial observations. Without satellites or GPS, they relied upon mathematics, experience, and the dependable movements of stars. It was navigation both ancient and modern. Steel ships, guided by techniques sailors had refined over centuries. Each noon, the officers calculated the distance traveled. Passengers eagerly awaited the announcement. How far had they come? How much farther remained? Every successful day strengthened confidence. Everything functioned perfectly. The weather remained calm. The engines performed flawlessly. Meals impressed even demanding travelers. Crew members carried out their duties with quiet efficiency. The voyage seemed destined to become exactly what everyone expected. A triumph. Yet far to the northwest. Beyond the horizon. Beyond anyone's sight. Enormous icebergs drifted slowly southward. They had broken away from Greenland months earlier, patiently carried by ocean currents. Silent mountains of ancient ice floating through dark water. Some towered more than 100 feet above the surface. Most of their enormous mass remained hidden beneath the sea. Beautiful, motionless, waiting. The Atlantic often appears empty. It never truly is. Somewhere beyond the horizon, nature had already arranged the meeting. Neither the ship nor the iceberg knew the other existed. Yet with every passing hour, they moved steadily toward the same point in the endless ocean. And history, as always, waited quietly between them. Life aboard the greatest ship in the world. By Friday morning, April 12, 1912, Titanic had settled into the quiet rhythm that every great ocean liner eventually found. The excitement of departure had faded. The novelty of exploring every hallway had begun to wear off. Passengers had learned which staircase was quickest, which deck offered the finest morning sunshine, where the sea breeze felt strongest, and which steward remembered exactly how they preferred their tea. Life aboard had become wonderfully ordinary. There is something almost magical about humanity's ability to normalize extraordinary things. Spend one day aboard the largest ship ever built, and you're amazed by every polished hallway. Spend 3 days aboard the same ship, and you're mildly irritated that your favorite chair in the reading room is already occupied. People have always possessed an astonishing talent for adapting. The Atlantic rolled gently beneath the ship, calm enough that many passengers barely felt the movement at all. It was what sailors affectionately called a kind sea. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, interrupted only by slow-moving clouds that drifted lazily across brilliant spring sunlight. The temperature had begun to cool slightly as the ship traveled farther north and west, though few gave it much thought. April in the North Atlantic was expected to be brisk. No one considered that unusual. Every morning began long before most passengers opened their eyes. Deep inside the ship, the day started around 5 o'clock. The bakery came alive first. Fresh bread required time. Dough rose. Ovens glowed. The warm smell of baking drifted through passageways hidden from passengers. Soon afterward came the kitchens. Knives chopped vegetables. Pots simmered. Eggs cracked one after another in almost endless succession. Coffee brewed. Tea was prepared by the gallon. Breakfast aboard Titanic was less a meal than a military campaign. More than 2,000 people expected food. Preferably hot. Preferably on time. Preferably exactly the way they liked it. An ambitious undertaking, especially when your restaurant happened to be floating hundreds of miles from the nearest grocery store. By 7:30, stewards quietly knocked on cabin doors. Some passengers requested breakfast in bed. Others preferred the dining saloons. A few energetic souls ventured onto the open decks before eating, wrapped in heavy coats against the crisp Atlantic air. The sea at sunrise possessed an unusual tranquility. The horizon appeared perfectly straight, dividing water and sky with astonishing precision. Occasionally dolphins appeared alongside the bow, racing effortlessly through the waves before disappearing just as suddenly. Passengers gathered along the railings whenever someone shouted. Dolphins. Human beings have remained remarkably easy to excite for thousands of years. Animals. Fireworks. Unexpectedly shaped clouds. We have not changed very much. First-class breakfast offered almost absurd abundance. Fresh fruit. Porridge. Kippers. Eggs prepared in countless ways. Ham. Bacon. Sausages. Kidneys. Toast. Muffins. Coffee. Tea. Chocolate. Jams. Honey. Cream. One suspects it required considerable determination to leave the table hungry. The dining saloon itself resembled one of London's finest hotels. Sunlight filtered through large windows. Silverware sparkled. Crystal glasses caught the morning light. Stewards moved almost silently between tables. Conversation remained pleasantly subdued. No one hurried. Ocean travel possessed a slower pace than modern transportation. There was nowhere else to be. No connecting flight to catch. No traffic to beat. The ship itself determined the schedule. After breakfast, passengers dispersed according to personal preference. Some gathered in the reading and writing room. Elegant ladies composed letters describing the magnificent ship. Although those letters would not be mailed until reaching New York, many enjoyed recording impressions while memories remained fresh. My dear sister, the voyage has been delightful. The ship exceeds every expectation. Simple words, written with calm confidence. None yet imagined history would preserve similar letters found later among recovered belongings. Nearby, gentlemen retired to the smoking room. Rich mahogany paneling lined the walls. Leather chairs invited lengthy conversation. Cigars filled the room with sweet, heavy smoke. Politics, business, investments, horse racing, European affairs. Every subject found willing participants. One can almost hear the discussions now. The markets will surely improve. I believe motor cars are the future. Wireless communication is extraordinary. The crossing has been remarkably smooth. It is strangely moving to imagine ordinary conversations taking place inside extraordinary circumstances. History tends to remember final moments. It often forgets ordinary afternoons. Yet those afternoons made up nearly all of life. Elsewhere aboard, second-class passengers enjoyed comforts that would have impressed travelers on many competing liners. Their library remained popular. Deck chairs overlooked the endless Atlantic. Meals were generous. Cabins comfortable. Many later remarked they had felt extraordinarily fortunate simply to travel on Titanic. Their experience lacked extravagant luxury, but possessed genuine dignity. Meanwhile, third class developed its own lively community. Children quickly formed friendships despite speaking different languages. Laughter echoed through passageways. Music occasionally drifted from informal gatherings where fiddles or accordions appeared. Young men discussed opportunities awaiting them in America. Older passengers exchanged stories about villages left behind. Meals became social occasions. Hope filled the air almost as strongly as steam filled the boilers. Many immigrants carried addresses carefully folded inside pockets. An uncle in Chicago, a cousin in Boston, a brother working in Pittsburgh. America often arrived first as handwriting on a piece of paper. One address, one promise, one chance. Above all these worlds, officers maintained quiet vigilance. Every 4 hours another watch assumed responsibility on the bridge. Navigation required constant attention. Compass headings, weather observations, engine orders, position calculations. The bridge itself remained surprisingly calm. No frantic shouting, no dramatic commands. Professional sailors valued routine. If everyone suddenly began running, that generally suggested something had gone rather badly. Fortunately, nothing had. Captain Edward Smith frequently walked the bridge with measured confidence. He greeted officers politely, reviewed reports, observed weather. Everything indicated another uneventful day, and uneventful days at sea were considered excellent news. Down below, however, routine demanded extraordinary labor. Coal consumption remained relentless. The ship burned approximately 600 tons every day. Imagine an entire trainload of coal disappearing into furnaces every 24 hours. Someone had to move every piece. Coal trimmers crawled through dark bunkers, shoveling fuel toward waiting firemen. Dust coated everything. The air remained thick. Breathing itself required effort. Firemen stood before furnace doors glowing white-hot. Every opening released waves of heat so intense that sweat evaporated almost instantly. Yet the work never stopped. Not for meals. Not for conversation. Not for scenery. The engines required steam. Steam required coal. Coal required men. Passengers strolling elegant promenades rarely considered the invisible army beneath their feet. Perhaps comfort always depends upon unseen labor. Titanic even possessed her own newspaper. Printed aboard each day, the Atlantic Daily Bulletin summarized wireless news received from Europe and North America. Passengers read about stock markets, sporting events, politics, and society gossip while crossing the ocean. Even in the middle of nowhere, people remained wonderfully interested in what everyone else happened to be doing. Some habits survive every technological revolution. During the afternoons, games became popular. Deck quoits, shuffleboard, conversations beneath blankets wrapped tightly against the cool breeze. Children chased one another beneath the watchful eyes of parents. Photographers captured family portraits against the backdrop of endless sea. Perhaps someone joked that they looked as though they had the entire Atlantic to themselves. For a while, they almost did. As evening approached, preparations for dinner transformed the ship. Cabins buzzed with activity. Ladies changed into elegant gowns. Jewelry caught electric light. Gentlemen struggled with stiff collars and formal evening wear. Stewards hurried through passageways delivering hot water and assisting wherever needed. Dinner aboard Titanic was an event rather than merely a meal. Courses arrived in graceful succession. Oysters, soup, fish, roast meats, vegetables, sorbet, game, desserts, cheeses, fruit, coffee. It was the culinary equivalent of a slow symphony. No one rushed. Conversation flowed easily. An orchestra performed softly nearby. Crystal glasses reflected warm light. Outside, darkness slowly settled across the Atlantic. One by one, stars emerged overhead. Without city lights, the night sky became almost overwhelming. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like spilled silver. Passengers standing alone on deck often found themselves speechless. The universe seemed unimaginably large. The ship impossibly small. And yet, Titanic herself remained brilliantly illuminated. Thousands of electric lights glowed warmly against the darkness. From a distance, she must have appeared like a floating city suspended between sea and stars. Beautiful, confident, alive. Wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride continued receiving messages late into the evening. Most contained routine passenger telegrams, business correspondence, personal greetings. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming. The radio room hummed with quiet efficiency. Invisible signals crossed the darkness above the Atlantic, connecting distant continents through nothing more substantial than radio waves. It still felt miraculous. Late that night, as many passengers retired to comfortable beds, officers continued watching the sea. The temperature had begun falling. Not dramatically, just enough for experienced sailors to notice. The air possessed a sharper edge. The breeze felt colder against the face. Somewhere to the northwest, beyond sight, the Labrador Current carried frigid water southward from Arctic regions. Floating within those waters drifted enormous icebergs born months earlier from Greenland's glaciers. The officers knew ice existed in the North Atlantic during spring. Every experienced captain knew that. Ships crossing these waters remained alert each season. Ice itself was not unusual. What mattered was location. And location could change. Wireless messages from other vessels would soon begin reporting increasing numbers of icebergs farther south than expected. For now, however, Titanic sailed confidently onward beneath clear skies and calm seas. The passengers slept peacefully. The crew performed their duties. The engines maintained their steady heartbeat. Far ahead, hidden beyond the darkness and the curve of the earth, ancient ice floated silently beneath the stars. With every revolution of the propellers, the distance between them grew smaller. History, though no one aboard realized it, had already begun its final countdown. Messages from the ice. Saturday, April 13th, 1912, arrived with the sort of morning that captains quietly appreciate. The Atlantic was calm. Not perfectly still, but gentle enough that breakfast cups remained comfortably in place, and only the faintest rise and fall reminded passengers they were crossing one of the largest oceans on Earth. The sun climbed slowly above the eastern horizon, casting long ribbons of gold across the water. The sky appeared almost impossibly clear, washed in pale blue without the threatening clouds that sailors instinctively watched. To the passengers, it was simply another beautiful day. To the officers on the bridge, it was another successful day. To history, it was the last full day before everything changed. One curious thing about disasters is that they almost never feel dramatic while they are approaching. Movies have taught us to expect thunder, dark clouds, violins, someone ominously saying, "I have a bad feeling about this." Reality is usually much quieter. Reality serves breakfast. Reality folds napkins. Reality writes postcards. Reality discusses the weather. Meanwhile, danger approaches with extraordinary patience. The iceberg that would eventually cross Titanic's path had likely begun its journey years earlier, long before Titanic's keel had even touched the Belfast shipyard. High above Greenland, winter after winter, snow had fallen upon ancient glaciers. Each snowfall compressed the one beneath it. Year after year, century after century. Eventually, enormous rivers of ice slowly crept toward the sea. Not quickly. Glaciers rarely hurry. They possess all the time in the world. Finally, under their own unimaginable weight, great sections cracked away. One tremendous fracture, a thunderous collapse, and another iceberg was born. It drifted away almost silently. A mountain of ice, most of it hidden beneath the water, patiently carried south by ocean currents. Long before anyone booked a ticket aboard Titanic, the iceberg had already begun traveling toward history. Aboard the ship, however, no one thought about Greenland. Most thought about lunch. Children continued exploring passageways with inexhaustible enthusiasm. The ship had become their playground. Some raced along open decks despite repeated warnings from parents. Others leaned carefully over railings watching the bow slice effortlessly through dark blue water. Every now and then flying fish, or what passengers believed were flying fish, sparked excited conversations. Even ordinary seabirds became noteworthy after several days surrounded by nothing but ocean. Isolation changes perspective. Back home, a bird is simply a bird. In the middle of the Atlantic, it's practically celebrity wildlife. First-class life continued with remarkable elegance. Ladies gathered in the palm court for tea. Fresh flowers decorated polished tables. Sunlight filtered through enormous windows. Quiet conversations drifted through rooms scented with perfume and polished wood. Gentlemen played cards. Some discussed business opportunities awaiting them in New York. Others debated politics. Europe, after all, appeared peaceful, stable, prosperous. No one present could know that only 2 years later much of the continent would descend into the unimaginable catastrophe of the First World War. History often hides one disaster behind another. Titanic would soon become world news. Then, only a short time later, an entire world would begin collapsing into trenches stretching across Europe. Perspective has a curious habit of changing over time. Second-class passengers enjoyed perhaps the most relaxed atmosphere aboard. They were neither overwhelmed by extravagant social expectations nor burdened by the uncertainties many immigrants faced. Teachers read novels. Clergy walked the decks. Families played simple games. Several passengers attended informal musical gatherings. Books changed hands. Friendships formed remarkably quickly. There is something about shared journeys that encourages strangers to become companions. Perhaps because everyone knows the same horizon. Down in third class, music echoed once again through common rooms. An Irish fiddle joined a Scandinavian folk tune. Children laughed despite speaking entirely different languages. Someone danced. Someone sang softly. For many passengers, this represented freedom already beginning. The old world lay behind them. The new one waited ahead. The Atlantic had become a bridge between identities. Some dreamed of opening small businesses. Others hoped merely to earn enough money to send for relatives still living in Europe. One young couple reportedly spent long evenings discussing what kind of house they might someday own. Imagine that conversation. Planning a future while unknowingly sailing toward one of history's most famous nights. It feels unbearably poignant. Yet perhaps hope is never more beautiful than when it remains innocent. Far below every cheerful conversation, Titanic's engine rooms continued their endless labor. The great reciprocating engines rose and fell with astonishing regularity. Steel connecting rods moved like giant mechanical limbs. Steam hissed continuously. Oil glistened beneath electric lights. The central turbine spun almost silently compared with the thunder of the piston engines. Experienced engineers walked narrow metal platforms listening, touching bearings, checking gauges, monitoring temperatures. Machines, like people, often whisper before they shout. The engineers knew this. Everything appeared healthy. Everything sounded exactly as expected. The ship was performing magnificently. At approximately noon, the officers determined Titanic's daily position. She had covered another impressive distance. The weather had cooperated beautifully. Captain Smith appeared satisfied. Passengers admired the ship's progress. The crossing remained ahead of schedule. Not dramatically, just enough to inspire quiet confidence. There was no prize for arriving first. White Star valued comfort more than speed. Still, there existed an understandable pride in operating such an efficient vessel. Efficiency itself had become something of a symbol during the early 20th century. Factories became faster. Railways became faster. Communication became faster. Ships became larger. Civilization seemed convinced that tomorrow must always improve upon yesterday. It was an intoxicating belief. Then the wireless room began receiving messages. Most sounded perfectly ordinary. Passenger telegrams, business correspondence, routine communication between ships. But gradually, another type of message appeared. Ice reports. The steamship Coronia transmitted one during the morning. Large quantities of field ice. Growlers. Icebergs. Their reported positions lay ahead of Titanic's route. Jack Phillips, Titanic's senior wireless operator, copied the message carefully. It reached the bridge. The officers noted the information. This was standard procedure. Ice warnings were neither rare nor particularly alarming. Ships crossing the North Atlantic frequently exchanged such reports during spring. Captains simply adjusted awareness accordingly. The Atlantic was vast. Icebergs drifted constantly. Navigation accounted for them. Nothing unusual. Nothing extraordinary. At least, not yet. Later that afternoon, another report arrived. Then another. Again, officers were informed. Charts gradually accumulated little marks indicating areas where ice had been sighted. Experienced captains understood these messages represented observations, not predictions. Icebergs moved. Currents shifted. Weather changed. Navigation remained an exercise in probability rather than certainty. Captain Smith reviewed the information. No dramatic conference followed. No panic spread through the bridge. No one believed disaster inevitable. Everything remained professional, measured, routine. This is one of history's most misunderstood moments. It is tempting to imagine everyone ignoring obvious danger. Reality proved far more complicated. The officers knew ice existed. They expected ice. The challenge lay in finding it within an ocean spanning millions of square miles. That evening, temperatures continued falling. Passengers noticed only enough to request heavier coats during walks on deck. The sea remained astonishingly calm. Too calm, perhaps. Experienced sailors sometimes preferred a slight swell because waves breaking against icebergs created visible white foam, making them easier to spot. Calm seas produced no such helpful signals. The ocean became smooth as polished glass. Beautiful, silent, potentially deceptive. Nature occasionally disguises danger beneath perfect weather. Dinner that evening remained every bit as elegant as before. The first-class menu featured extravagant courses prepared with extraordinary care. Wine flowed freely. Conversation remained lively. The orchestra played softly. No one sensed urgency. No one hurried through dessert. Afterward, some passengers retired to the smoking room. Others gathered for bridge games. Several couples walked beneath brilliant stars despite the increasingly cold air. One passenger reportedly remarked upon the unusual clarity of the night sky. Without moonlight, countless stars blazed overhead. The heavens appeared almost crowded. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness with astonishing brilliance. It was breathtaking. It was also slightly problematic. Without moonlight, the horizon became harder to distinguish. Icebergs reflected little light. Only their darker outlines interrupted an already dark sea. Visibility depended largely upon sharp eyes. Fortunately, Titanic employed experienced lookouts. Unfortunately, experience can only detect what nature allows people to see. High above the waterline, in the crow's nest near the foremast, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee prepared for another watch. The wind bit harder now. The cold had deepened noticeably. They stamped their feet occasionally to restore circulation. From their lofty position, they scanned the darkness ahead. Hour after hour. See. Stars. See again. Nothing unusual. At least not yet. One detail quietly bothered Fleet. The lookouts had no binoculars. Not because anyone considered them unnecessary. Through a remarkably ordinary chain of administrative confusion, the cabinet containing them had remained locked after a last-minute personnel change before departure from Southampton. The key had left the ship in someone's pocket. It sounds almost absurd. One misplaced key. One forgotten pair of binoculars. History occasionally turns upon astonishingly small inconveniences. Would binoculars have changed the outcome? Historians still debate the question. Perhaps. Perhaps not. On an exceptionally dark, moonless night, binoculars often narrowed rather than widened one's field of vision. Even today, no one knows for certain. But it remains one of those tiny details that quietly lingers in the imagination. Near midnight, Titanic continued westward beneath a sky overflowing with stars. The engines maintained their steady rhythm. Passengers slept peacefully. Coal continued disappearing into roaring furnaces. Wireless operators remained busy. Officers changed watch with practiced efficiency. Far ahead, beyond sight, ancient ice drifted silently across the shipping lane. The meeting point drew closer with every mile. Neither ship nor iceberg altered course. Neither knew the other existed. Sunday, April 14th, 1912, the last ordinary day. Sunday arrived with an almost unsettling sense of peace. If someone had quietly stepped aboard Titanic that morning without knowing anything about history, they might have concluded they had chosen the finest day of the entire voyage. The sea was calm. The sky was brilliantly clear. The engines purred with unwavering confidence. Passengers slept well, rose slowly, dressed for breakfast, and began another day aboard what many already considered the greatest ship ever built. There was no sense of urgency, no whispered concern, no mysterious feeling hanging over the decks. Just another Sunday at sea. History has a peculiar affection for ordinary mornings before extraordinary nights. The first rays of sunlight spread across the Atlantic shortly after dawn, turning the surface of the ocean into a sheet of shimmering silver. There was almost no swell. The horizon looked impossibly sharp, as though someone had carefully drawn a line dividing the world in two. It was beautiful enough that several early risers lingered on deck despite the increasingly cold breeze. Some stood silently with steaming cups of coffee. Others simply watched the endless water. There is something strangely calming about staring at an ocean. Perhaps because it asks nothing from you. It doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't care about deadlines. It simply exists. The Atlantic has been doing precisely that for millions of years. Inside the first-class dining saloon, breakfast unfolded with the same effortless elegance passengers had come to expect. Fresh fruit appeared first, then porridge, eggs, ham, smoked fish, toast still warm from the ovens. Silver coffee pots reflected the morning sunlight. Stewards moved quietly between tables with almost invisible precision. Captain Edward Smith occasionally joined passengers for meals, exchanging polite conversation. He looked every bit the experienced commander people expected. Calm, well-groomed, composed. Nothing in his expression hinted at concern. Why would it? The voyage had been exceptionally successful. The ship had performed flawlessly. Weather conditions remained excellent. Every outward sign suggested another peaceful day ahead. After breakfast, many passengers attended Sunday church services. The atmosphere aboard changed noticeably. The lively conversations of previous mornings softened into quieter voices. Some passengers dressed more formally than usual. Hymns drifted gently through gathering rooms. Prayers were offered. Scripture was read. The familiar rituals brought comfort to people far from home. It is one of humanity's oldest habits. When surrounded by uncertainty, even when we do not realize uncertainty exists, we often seek familiar traditions. No one could know those hymns would become some of the final peaceful memories many passengers carried. Elsewhere aboard, children cared very little about solemnity. Sunday or not, the ship remained wonderfully exciting. Young boys raced along open decks pretending to captain imaginary ships. Girls chased one another around benches, while mothers gently reminded them not to run. A small group gathered near the railings watching seabirds glide effortlessly over the waves. One child asked how deep the ocean was. An adult smiled. Very deep. An answer both entirely correct and astonishingly inadequate. Beneath Titanic lay nearly 2 miles of cold Atlantic water. No passenger could truly imagine such depth. Most of us cannot. The human mind struggles with distances it cannot see. In the second-class library, several passengers settled into comfortable chairs with novels borrowed from the ship's collection. Others wrote letters. Some played cards. The atmosphere felt almost like a quiet country hotel. Far removed from factories. Far removed from crowded cities. Far removed from ordinary worries. Ocean travel possessed a unique ability to suspend normal life. One could almost believe the rest of the world had politely agreed to wait until arrival. Third class buzzed with conversation. Many immigrants spent part of the day discussing America. Where would they work? Would relatives truly meet them in New York? Would they recognize one another after years apart? Dreams often become more vivid when they draw near. The skyline of New York remained several days away. Yet already it existed vividly inside countless imaginations. Some pictured enormous buildings. Others imagined endless streets lined with opportunity. A few worried quietly about immigration inspections. Would they be allowed ashore? Would officials reject them? Hope and anxiety often travel together. Below decks, Sunday felt remarkably similar to every other day. Coal still needed shoveling. Engines still required attention. Meals still had to be prepared. Laundry still accumulated. Steam never observed weekends. The boiler rooms remained infernally hot despite the increasingly cold air outside. Firemen worked stripped to undershirts, muscles glistening with sweat beneath electric lights. Each furnace roared like a miniature volcano. Every few moments, another heavy shovel of coal disappeared into orange flames. The contrast remained extraordinary. Above deck, passengers buttoned heavier coats against the chill. Below deck, men fought exhaustion inside temperatures approaching unbearable heat. Two entirely different climates. One ship. Around midday, Captain Smith attended church services before resuming his usual rounds. Officers continued plotting the ship's position. Everything remained reassuringly routine. At approximately noon, Titanic's navigators calculated another excellent day's progress. The ship maintained a comfortable speed of around 21 to 22 knots. Not quite her maximum capability. Certainly not racing recklessly. Simply making good time. This distinction matters. Popular imagination often portrays Titanic charging recklessly through dangerous waters at full speed. Reality proved more nuanced. She was traveling at a speed considered reasonable by experienced captains crossing the North Atlantic. Whether that judgment should have changed given increasing ice reports remains one of history's enduring debates. Throughout the day, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride received numerous messages. Many came from passengers eager to send personal telegrams before reaching America. Business messages accumulated rapidly. Phillips focused intensely on clearing the growing backlog. Wireless communication had become immensely popular. Passengers expected prompt service. Meanwhile, additional ice reports arrived from other ships. The steamship Baltic transmitted information describing large ice fields and numerous icebergs directly ahead of Titanic's general route. Captain Smith reviewed the message personally. He even showed it briefly to Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line. The report was then placed among other navigation documents. Again, there was no panic. Ice reports formed part of ordinary North Atlantic navigation. Still, the pile of reports was growing. As afternoon drifted quietly toward evening, the weather became even calmer, almost unnaturally calm. Experienced sailors occasionally remarked upon it. The sea resembled polished glass. No waves broke against the surface. No whitecaps interrupted the endless blue. It was breathtaking. It was also quietly unsettling. Waves usually reveal obstacles. They crash against rocks. They splash around floating debris. Most importantly, they break against icebergs. Without waves, an iceberg became little more than a dark shape against an already dark horizon. Nature had unintentionally removed one of the ocean's warning signs. By late afternoon, the air temperature continued falling steadily. Passengers noticed. Stewards distributed additional blankets for deck chairs. Ladies requested heavier coats before evening walks. Gentlemen commented that the air felt unusually crisp. One might reasonably conclude that winter had somehow wandered into April. No one connected the cold with nearby ice. At sea, cold weather alone proves very little. At approximately 5:50 p.m., another important wireless message arrived. This one came from the steamship Californian. It reported 3 enormous icebergs. The information reached the bridge. Again, routine, professional, logged, nothing dramatic, no sirens, no emergency meeting, simply another piece of navigational information. History often appears frustratingly ordinary while unfolding. Evening descended slowly. The Atlantic transformed from brilliant blue to deep purple, then black. Sunset painted the western sky with remarkable colors. Passengers gathered along the promenade deck simply to watch. The ocean reflected crimson and gold before darkness gradually consumed both. Several photographers attempted to capture the view. Most failed. Early cameras struggled with fading light. Some moments simply refused to be preserved. Perhaps that made them more precious. Dinner on Sunday evening became one of the most memorable meals in maritime history. Not because anyone realized its significance, because history later assigned significance to every ordinary detail. The first-class menu reflected astonishing culinary ambition. Oysters, consommé, poached salmon, roasted duckling, filet mignon, lamb, fresh vegetables, pâté, asparagus, artichokes, eclairs, peaches and jelly, ice cream, cheese, fruit, coffee, an extraordinary feast. Passengers discussed politics, travel, business, fashion. No one discussed survival. No one imagined lifeboats. No one glanced nervously toward the windows. Outside, the Atlantic remained perfectly calm. Following dinner, the orchestra resumed playing. Soft violin melodies drifted through elegant rooms. Cards were dealt. Brandy poured. Books opened. Letters continued being written. Couples walked beneath brilliant stars. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Breath became visible. Still, many found the evening beautiful. There was no moon. The heavens blazed with countless stars. The Milky Way stretched overhead with astonishing clarity. Several passengers later recalled never seeing such a magnificent sky. Ironically, the very conditions creating that breathtaking view also made the sea exceptionally difficult to read. Without moonlight, without waves, without clouds, the ocean disappeared into darkness. Sea and sky became almost indistinguishable. At 7:15 p.m., another wireless report arrived. Then another around 9:40. The growing pattern became unmistakable. Ice, icebergs, field ice, growlers, pack ice. Ship after ship described dangerous conditions. Some messages reached the bridge promptly. Others experienced delays while wireless operators handled heavy passenger traffic. At approximately 10:55 p.m., the nearby steamship Californian attempted to warn Titanic directly. Its operator, Cyril Evans, transmitted that his vessel had stopped for the night because dense ice blocked further progress. Jack Phillips, already overwhelmed by passenger telegrams, replied sharply, "Keep out. Shut up. I'm working Cape Race." It was not unusual. Wireless operators often exchanged brisk messages under pressure. Phillips simply wanted uninterrupted communication with Newfoundland. Evans, assuming Titanic had received earlier warnings, switched off his wireless equipment and went to bed. The Californian, only a relatively short distance away, fell silent. One conversation, a few impatient words, another tiny moment history would later examine endlessly. At 10 p.m., the watch changed on Titanic's bridge. Second Officer Charles Lightoller handed responsibility to First Officer William Murdoch. Captain Smith spoke briefly with Murdoch before retiring for the evening. He reportedly instructed the officers to notify him if conditions became questionable. Then he walked quietly to his cabin. The ship continued westward. The engines maintained steady revolutions. Passengers gradually retired to bed. The orchestra packed away instruments. Stewards extinguished lights in empty rooms. High above the deck, two lookouts resumed their lonely vigil inside the crow's nest. The cold had become biting. The sea remained smooth as polished glass. Ahead, nothing but darkness. Or so it seemed. Far beyond the reach of Titanic's lights, hidden within the black Atlantic, an enormous iceberg drifted silently across the shipping lane. For thousands of years, it had known only wind, current, and silence. In less than 2 hours, it would meet the greatest ship humanity had ever built. 11:40 p.m. The North Atlantic had become almost impossibly quiet. It was now late Sunday evening, April 14, 1912. Most of Titanic's passengers had gone to bed. The laughter that had filled the dining saloons only hours earlier had faded into silence. The orchestra had packed away its instruments. The kitchens had finished serving the last meals of the evening. Stewards quietly extinguished lights throughout the ship, leaving only the gentle glow of corridor lamps. Outside, the world seemed frozen. Not literally, not yet, but emotionally. The ocean had become a vast sheet of polished black glass stretching endlessly beneath an equally black sky filled with stars. There was no moon, no whitecaps, no rain, no fog. Ironically, it was almost perfect weather, and that perfection would soon become part of the problem. At precisely 10 o'clock, First Officer William Murdoch had assumed command of the bridge. Murdoch was 40 years old, Scottish, highly respected, experienced. He had spent nearly his entire adult life at sea. The bridge remained calm. Quartermaster Robert Hickens stood at the wheel. Other officers quietly observed the darkness ahead. Compass headings were checked. Courses confirmed. The engines continued their steady rhythm below. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing sounded unusual. Everything about the ship suggested another peaceful night crossing. Far above them, nearly 100 feet above the sea, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee stood inside the crow's nest. The cold had become almost painful. Their breath drifted away in pale clouds. Every few moments they stamped their feet against the freezing metal floor to restore circulation. Hour after hour they stared into darkness. The job demanded extraordinary concentration. Imagine watching an almost completely black horizon for 4 straight hours. Your eyes begin inventing shapes. Clouds become ships. Stars seem to move. Dark patches appear and disappear. Fatigue quietly joins imagination. Still, they watched. Carefully, patiently, continuously. Around the same time, Captain Edward Smith slept in his cabin. Not deeply. Experienced captains rarely slept deeply at sea. Years of responsibility trained them to awaken quickly if summoned. His cabin lay only a short distance from the bridge. If needed, he could be there within moments. He had instructed his officers to notify him immediately should visibility worsen or if anything unusual occurred. From everything he knew before retiring, the voyage remained under complete control. Elsewhere aboard, passengers dreamed ordinary dreams. Some dreamed of New York. Some dreamed of England. Children dreamed the uncomplicated dreams children always dream. One young couple likely imagined the new life waiting beyond Ellis Island. A businessman perhaps rehearsed tomorrow's meetings. Someone worried about family. Someone remembered home. Someone snored loudly enough to irritate their cabin companion. History often forgets these tiny human moments. Yet they were real. The ship contained over 2,000 individual lives. 2,000 separate stories. 2,000 futures. Each one quietly sleeping beneath the stars. Deep below, the engines continued their relentless work. The great pistons rose. Fell. Rose again. Thousands of moving parts performed their mechanical dance with astonishing precision. Coal continued disappearing into furnaces. Steam rushed through pipes. Generators supplied electricity throughout the ship. Nothing had changed. Nothing suggested danger. The machinery possessed no awareness of what lay ahead. Machines never do. Far ahead, something else moved almost imperceptibly through the darkness. The iceberg. Imagine standing beside a 15-story building carved entirely from ancient blue-white ice. Now imagine nearly 90% of that mountain hidden beneath the sea. Silent, motionless, patient. The iceberg had drifted south for months. Perhaps years had passed since it separated from Greenland. Wind had shaped it. Sunlight had polished it. Waves had sculpted its sides. It possessed no intention, no malice. Nature rarely does. An iceberg cannot hate. It simply exists. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Titanic continued steaming westward at about 22 knots, roughly 25 miles per hour, comfortably fast for the period. The ship displaced enormous quantities of water while maintaining extraordinary stability. Passengers asleep in their cabins likely felt almost no movement at all. Had they awakened briefly, they probably would have concluded everything remained perfectly ordinary. They would have been correct. For another 10 minutes, in the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet continued scanning the horizon. His eyes had adjusted completely to the darkness. He searched for anything. A shadow, a change in texture, a break in the stars. The ocean remained unnaturally smooth. No waves crashed. No spray reflected light. There was only darkness. Then, something changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Just enough. Straight ahead, the stars disappeared. Not because clouds covered them, because something enormous now stood between the stars and the ship. A black shape, growing larger. Fleet leaned forward. His heart almost certainly began beating faster. He looked again. This time there was no doubt. An object, directly ahead. Much closer than it should have been. At 11:39 p.m., Frederick Fleet reached for the brass warning bell beside him. 3 sharp rings echoed through the freezing night. Clang, clang, clang. Below, on the bridge, every officer instantly understood the signal. Danger ahead. Almost simultaneously, Fleet grabbed the telephone. His voice remained remarkably controlled. Iceberg right ahead. For simple words. Perhaps the most famous 4 words ever spoken aboard a ship. First Officer Murdoch reacted instantly. There was no hesitation, no panic, no confusion. His training took over. Hard a starboard. The command sounds confusing today because steering terminology has since changed. In 1912, hard a starboard ordered the ship's bow to turn left. Quartermaster Robert Hickens spun the wheel with astonishing speed. The massive rudder began responding. Murdoch immediately ordered. Full astern. Engine room telegraphs clanged. Signals raced below. Officers sprang into motion. Every second mattered. Titanic, however, was almost 900 feet long. 46,000 tons. Objects that enormous do not turn like rowboats. Physics is wonderfully consistent that way. From the bridge, the iceberg rapidly emerged from darkness. It appeared ghostly white against the Black Sea. Towering, silent, beautiful, terrifying. Some officers later estimated its height at around 100 feet above the water. Others remembered jagged peaks resembling cliffs. Memory became unreliable after trauma, but everyone agreed upon one point. It was enormous. Passengers remained asleep. Most had absolutely no idea anything unusual was happening. The engines still hummed. The ship still moved smoothly. No alarms sounded. No one shouted through passageways. The calm aboard remained almost surreal. On the bridge, Murdoch watched desperately as Titanic slowly began swinging to port. For one brief moment, it almost seemed enough. The bow started clearing the ice. Hope flickered. Perhaps they would miss it. Perhaps history would never remember this night. Perhaps tomorrow's newspapers would report nothing at all. Then, the iceberg reached the starboard side. At 11:40 p.m., contact. Not a tremendous explosion. Not the earth-shaking crash movies often portray. Many passengers later described the sensation as surprisingly gentle. A long scraping vibration, almost like running one's hand across coarse fabric, or dragging a finger along a picket fence. A faint shudder passed through the ship. Some heard a grinding noise. Others noticed only a slight trembling beneath their feet. A few awakened. Most did not. One passenger reportedly joked that someone had dropped an anchor. Another barely looked up from a card game. The collision lacked drama. That was precisely what made it so deceptive. Outside, enormous sheets of ice broke away from the iceberg and crashed onto the forward well deck. chunks scattered across the planking. Some passengers who happened to be outside laughed. They picked up pieces of ice, played with them, kicked them across the deck. One reportedly carried a fragment inside as a souvenir. Imagine that, holding a piece of the very object already deciding your fate. Without realizing it, below the waterline, the story proved very different. Titanic did not suffer one gigantic wound. Instead, the iceberg's submerged ice scraped along the starboard side for several seconds. Steel plates buckled, rivets popped, seams opened, not dramatically, not all at once, but across multiple watertight compartments. Water immediately rushed inward. Thousands of tons, cold beyond imagination, relentless. The sea had found its opening. In Boiler Room 6, workers heard a terrible sound, metal groaning, then water. A freezing torrent burst through damaged plating. Within moments, men were ankle-deep, then knee-deep. Firemen abandoned shovels. Engineers shouted orders. Watertight doors were activated. Heavy steel barriers slowly descended between compartments. Exactly as designed. The safety system worked. Perfectly. Almost. The problem was mathematical. Titanic could survive flooding in 4 forward compartments. Possibly. The iceberg had opened 6. Water poured into the first compartment, then the second, then the third. As each filled, the bow settled lower. Water spilled over the tops of bulkheads into the next compartment, like filling one glass after another. Thomas Andrews had understood this possibility during design. He simply never believed it likely enough to occur. Now, it had. Captain Smith arrived on the bridge within moments, still wearing nightclothes beneath his coat. Calm, focused. What have we struck? An iceberg, sir. No shouting, no accusations, just facts. Professional sailors understand that blame can wait. Action cannot. Smith and Andrews immediately began inspecting the damage. Below them, invisible to almost everyone aboard, the Atlantic continued pouring into Titanic. 7 tons, 10 tons, 20 tons, every second. The ship still looked magnificent from above. The lights still glowed. The orchestra's chairs still stood neatly arranged. Most passengers still slept peacefully. Yet beneath the surface, history had already made its decision. The greatest ship in the world had just received a wound from which she would never recover. She is going to sink. For several long moments after the collision, almost nothing seemed to happen. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous part. There was no deafening explosion, no collapsing smokestacks, no immediate rush of terrified passengers filling the corridors. Instead, there was silence. The engines gradually slowed, then stopped. The steady vibration that had quietly accompanied every moment of the voyage suddenly disappeared. Many passengers noticed that before they noticed anything else. One man reportedly looked up from his book and frowned. Have we stopped? A woman in first class paused while removing her evening jewelry. She noticed the strange stillness beneath her feet. Several passengers pulled back their curtains and peered into the darkness. Nothing. Just stars. Just sea. Just another peaceful night. Or so it appeared. On the bridge, however, peace had vanished. Captain Edward Smith looked toward First Officer William Murdoch. What have we hit? An iceberg, sir. Simple words. Calmly spoken. Professionally delivered. Smith asked another question. Close the watertight doors. The order had already been carried out. Deep below the waterline, heavy steel doors had descended exactly as designed, sealing sections of the ship from one another. The system worked flawlessly. No mechanical failure. No panic. No delay. It was exactly what Titanic's designers had intended. Unfortunately, the ocean had found a problem engineering alone could not solve. Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews immediately headed below. They moved quickly through passageways still almost entirely empty. Only a handful of crew members had any idea something serious had happened. Stewards waited quietly outside cabins. Firemen hurried through machinery spaces. Engineers shouted reports over the roar of incoming water. Most passengers remained blissfully unaware. The contrast felt almost surreal. Above deck, luxury. Below deck, the Atlantic had already entered. Boiler Room 6 was flooding rapidly. The freezing water burst through damaged seams with astonishing force. Firemen struggled to maintain footing as icy water spread across the floor. Within minutes, they realized there was no possibility of stopping it. The sea cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be persuaded. It cannot be negotiated into slowing down for a moment while everyone thinks. It simply keeps coming. The men abandoned their positions and retreated into the next compartment before the watertight doors sealed behind them. Their escape was timed almost perfectly. A few moments later, the compartment belonged entirely to the ocean. Thomas Andrews moved methodically from compartment to compartment. He was not guessing. He was calculating. He understood Titanic's design more intimately than anyone alive. He knew every bulkhead, every frame, every watertight. He watched the water rising, measured its speed, examined the damaged sections, listened, thought. The realization came frighteningly quickly. He did not need hours, only minutes. Water had entered the first 6 forward compartments. The bow was already settling. As each compartment filled, water would eventually spill over into the next because the watertight bulkheads did not extend all the way to the upper decks. They had never been intended to. The system assumed fewer compartments would flood. That assumption had just been shattered. Andrews climbed back toward the bridge. Captain Smith waited. There are moments in history when entire futures depend upon a single conversation. This was one of them. Smith looked at Andrews. Well, Andrews did not dramatize his answer. He simply told the truth. The ship is going to sink. Imagine hearing those words. Not from a frightened passenger. Not from an inexperienced sailor. From the man who designed the ship. The man who knew every bolt, every rivet, every calculation. If he believed Titanic could not survive, there was no one more qualified to disagree. Captain Smith remained silent for several seconds. One can only imagine the thoughts racing through his mind. Nearly 20 years commanding ships. Thousands of successful crossings. The trust of the White Star Line. More than 2,000 souls aboard. Now, all of it rested upon decisions that would be made during the next few minutes. He asked the question every captain would ask. How long? Andrews reportedly estimated somewhere between an hour and a half. Perhaps 2. History would prove him astonishingly accurate. Smith did not collapse. He did not shout. He did not freeze. Professional sailors are trained for emergencies, even unimaginable ones. He immediately began issuing orders. Prepare the lifeboats. Wake the passengers. Send distress calls. 3 commands. Simple. Necessary. Urgent. Meanwhile, Titanic herself gave remarkably little indication of catastrophe. She remained brightly illuminated. Electric lights continued glowing throughout the ship. The heating still functioned. The carpets remained dry. The chandeliers sparkled exactly as before. One might easily mistake the situation for a brief mechanical delay. That illusion would not last forever. But for now, it persisted. In the wireless room, Jack Phillips had been working through a mountain of passenger telegrams when the bridge interrupted. Captain Smith entered. We've struck an iceberg. Send out the distress call. Phillips looked up. Perhaps he had expected some mechanical inconvenience. Instead, he found the captain himself standing in the doorway. No dramatics. No panic. Just unmistakable seriousness. Within moments, Phillips and Harold Bride prepared the wireless equipment. The first distress message went out using the established signal. CQD. CQ. Calling all stations. D. Distress. Repeated again. And again. Across invisible radio waves, Titanic's plea spread into the darkness. Nearby ships began answering. The German liner Frankfurt responded. The Carpathia replied. The Olympic, Titanic's own sister ship, acknowledged the message. Captain Arthur Rostron aboard the Carpathia reacted immediately. He ordered his ship turned toward Titanic at full speed. Every unnecessary source of steam was redirected to the engines. Hot water for passengers was temporarily reduced. Heating limited. Everything possible was sacrificed for speed. The Carpathia surged forward through the night. There was only one problem. She was nearly 60 miles away. Even at maximum speed, she could not arrive before dawn. Back aboard Titanic, stewards quietly began knocking on cabin doors. Please put on your life belts. There has been a slight accident. There is no cause for alarm. Those words echoed through countless corridors. No cause for alarm. The phrase seems almost heartbreaking now, yet it served an important purpose. Head steward shouted, "The ship is sinking." Chaos might have begun immediately. Order remained essential. Without order, thousands would certainly die. With order, perhaps many could still be saved. Passengers reacted in remarkably human ways. Some laughed. Others complained about being awakened. One gentleman reportedly refused to leave his warm bed until convinced the situation was genuine. Another asked whether he truly needed to wear the awkward cork life jacket. A woman worried more about catching cold than about drowning. It sounds absurd, yet it makes perfect sense. Human beings struggle to comprehend impossible news, especially when everything around them still appears perfectly normal. The lights remained on. The ship wasn't listing dramatically. The music hadn't stopped because there wasn't any music to stop. There were no visible flames, no smoke, no screaming crowds. Why panic? The danger remained almost entirely hidden beneath the waterline. Captain Smith ordered the lifeboats uncovered. Crew members hurried onto the boat deck. Canvas covers came off. Ropes checked. Davits prepared. Everything had been practiced. At least, in theory. Titanic carried 20 lifeboats. Enough for approximately 1,178 people. The ship carried over 2,200. Even before the first boat touched the water, more than 1,000 people already had no place inside them. This fact has haunted history ever since. Why so few? The answer is frustratingly ordinary. Maritime regulations at the time based lifeboat requirements primarily upon a ship's tonnage rather than passenger capacity. The rules had failed to keep pace with rapidly growing ship sizes. Titanic technically exceeded the legal requirement. Legally, she carried enough boats. Practically, she did not. History often reminds us that legality and adequacy are not always the same thing. As crew members prepared the first lifeboats, passengers slowly gathered on deck. The cold struck them immediately. Many had dressed hurriedly. Evening gowns beneath heavy coats. Slippers instead of boots. Shawls thrown over nightclothes. Children wrapped in blankets. The air temperature had fallen below freezing. Their breath drifted into the darkness like pale ghosts. Above them, countless stars still shone with breathtaking clarity. Below them, the Atlantic waited. Calm, black, mercilessly cold. Few passengers realized it yet, but the ship beneath their feet had already begun settling deeper into the sea. The bow dropped almost imperceptibly, a degree, then another, so slight that many never noticed. Thomas Andrews noticed. The officers noticed. The sea certainly noticed. Every minute, the Atlantic claimed a little more of the greatest ship ever built. And time was running out. The last 2 hours. The clock had only just passed midnight. Technically, it was now Monday, April 15th, 1912. Only 20 minutes earlier, most of the people aboard Titanic had been asleep. Now, more than 2,000 souls stood somewhere between confusion and disbelief, gathered in passageways, climbing staircases, buttoning heavy coats over nightclothes, carrying children wrapped in blankets, or asking the same simple question over and over again. What happened? No one yet understood that they had entered the final chapter of the ship's existence. Not because anyone was hiding the truth, because the truth itself was almost impossible to accept. The world's newest, largest, and safest passenger liner was sinking. Slowly, quietly, unavoidably. The boat deck filled gradually. There was no stampede, no screaming crowd, at least not at first. The remarkable thing about the early stages of the disaster is how civilized they appeared. Officers spoke calmly. Stewards guided passengers politely. Crew members removed canvas covers from the lifeboats. The electric lights still burned brightly, casting a warm yellow glow across polished wooden decks. If one ignored the bitter cold and the life jackets, it almost resembled an unusually late evening promenade. Captain Smith moved continuously from one group to another. His face remained composed, though witnesses later remembered an unmistakable gravity in his expression. He understood what few others yet did. Time had become the most precious resource aboard the ship. Every minute lost could never be recovered. Thomas Andrews walked rapidly through the vessel he had spent years creating. The irony was almost unbearable. No one aboard knew Titanic more intimately than he did. He knew where every corridor led, every staircase, every boiler room, every compartment. Now he watched the sea slowly reclaim his masterpiece. Witnesses later recalled Andrews encouraging passengers to put on life jackets, helping people find the boat deck, urging stewards to hurry. Several remembered him repeating the same words again and again. There is not a moment to lose. He never shouted. He never panicked. He simply continued helping. The first lifeboat prepared was number 7 on the starboard side. It could carry 65 people. Only 28 climbed aboard. 28. Nearly 40 empty spaces drifted away into the darkness. The officers begged people to enter. Many refused. From the deck, the ship appeared perfectly safe. The lifeboat, hanging high above the freezing Atlantic, looked considerably less appealing. One woman reportedly asked, "Why should I leave this perfectly good ship?" It was an understandable question. Titanic still looked magnificent. The sea looked terrifying. Choosing between them seemed almost absurd. History would later judge those empty seats with heartbreaking clarity. But standing there in 1912, the decision felt far less obvious. As boat number 7 disappeared into the darkness, another followed. Then another. Again, they left partially filled. Some passengers laughed nervously as they descended. Others waved toward friends still aboard. Several believed they would spend an hour or two floating nearby before returning once the minor emergency had been resolved. The possibility that Titanic herself might disappear beneath the sea remained almost unimaginable. After all, she was Titanic. Down below, however, reality grew steadily harsher. The forward compartments continued filling relentlessly. Water spilled from one flooded section into the next. The bow settled lower. Crew members noticed the change immediately. Passageways that had remained dry only minutes earlier now glistened with icy seawater. Mail clerks struggled desperately to save thousands of letters. Engineers continued working despite knowing their chances of survival diminished with every passing minute. The men in the boiler rooms remained at their posts for as long as possible. Steam pressure had to be managed carefully. Electricity needed to remain available. The pumps continued fighting a battle they could never win. These workers understood something many passengers did not. The ship was dying, yet they remained. Not because anyone forced them, because without them, the lights would fail far sooner. Without them, panic would spread more quickly. History often remembers heroes wearing uniforms. Sometimes heroes simply carry shovels. Around 12:25 a.m., the first distress rockets streaked upward into the night sky. A brilliant white flare climbed above Titanic before exploding silently among the stars. Another followed several minutes later. Then another, one every few minutes. From a distance, they must have looked strangely beautiful. Tiny artificial stars blooming above an ocean otherwise consumed by darkness. Far away, officers aboard the nearby steamship California noticed them. They watched the mysterious rockets with growing curiosity. Were they company signals? Celebrations? Distress calls? The uncertainty proved tragic. Without wireless communication, their radio operator had gone to bed. They had only what they could see. And what they saw? They misunderstood. Back aboard Titanic, the atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly. The list to starboard became easier to notice. Walking across certain sections of deck now felt subtly different. Objects no longer rested quite where they had been placed. Passengers began asking more urgent questions. Crew members answered as calmly as possible. But calm became increasingly difficult to maintain, especially when lifeboats continued leaving only half full. The famous order, "Women and children first," was interpreted differently by different officers. Second Officer Lightoller, commanding the port side, enforced it literally. Only women and children entered the boats whenever possible. Many men stepped back without protest. Others protested quietly. Some kissed wives goodbye. Some hugged children. Many fully expected to see them again within a few hours. On the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch adopted a slightly more flexible interpretation. If no women remained nearby, men were permitted to board empty seats. Neither officer acted from cruelty. Both acted according to their understanding of duty. History later debated their choices endlessly. Standing there in the freezing darkness, they simply tried to save as many lives as possible. One of the most moving scenes unfolded near lifeboat number 8. Isidor Strauss and his wife Ida approached together. Crew members urged Ida to board. She refused. "I will not be separated from my husband." According to survivors, she quietly said, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." She stepped back out of the lifeboat. Another woman took her place. The Strausses remained aboard together. History contains many grand speeches. Few possess the quiet power of simple loyalty. Elsewhere, another extraordinary story unfolded. Benjamin Guggenheim, realizing the seriousness of the situation, reportedly returned to his cabin. He changed into formal evening clothes, then emerged wearing his finest suit. "We've dressed up in our best," he reportedly remarked, "and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." Whether every word survives exactly as spoken matters less than the spirit behind them. There was dignity aboard Titanic that night. Not everywhere, not always, but enough to leave an enduring impression. The ship's musicians gathered once again. Led by Wallace Hartley, they began playing softly near the boat deck. No one ordered them. No officer commanded it. They simply played. Music calmed frightened passengers. It steadied nerves. It preserved a sense of civilization amid growing uncertainty. Exactly what they played remains debated. Survivors remembered different melodies. Memory often becomes unreliable during trauma. What remains certain is this: they continued performing, long after many others had stopped believing. By 1 a.m., Titanic's bow had dropped noticeably. Even passengers with no nautical experience could now feel the angle beneath their feet. The sea crept steadily closer to the ship's name painted proudly across the bow. Cold water flooded the mailroom, then lower corridors, then cabins. Some third-class passengers encountered locked gates, not prison bars, as later myths often claimed, but barriers used to separate classes according to immigration regulations. Crew members struggled to direct people through unfamiliar passageways toward the upper decks. Language differences complicated everything. English instructions meant little to passengers who spoke only Finnish, Swedish, Arabic, or Italian. Confusion spread, not because people lacked courage, because they lacked information. The rockets continued climbing into the star-filled sky. The orchestra continued playing. Wireless operators continued sending desperate messages. CQD. CQD. Then, a newer signal. SOS. One of the first major uses of the now famous distress call. Harold Bride reportedly joked, "Send SOS. It's the new call, and it may be your last chance to use it." Even in catastrophe, human beings somehow find room for humor. Perhaps not because circumstances deserve it, but because we do. At 1:20 a.m., lifeboats departed more rapidly now. The officers had finally convinced passengers that remaining aboard had become far more dangerous than climbing into small wooden boats. The list increased. The cold intensified. The truth became impossible to deny. Titanic was sinking. There would not be enough boats. And still, the lights remained on. The orchestra continued. The stars shone overhead with breathtaking brilliance. It was almost impossible to reconcile such beauty with the unfolding tragedy below. Nature often remains astonishingly indifferent. The universe does not dim its stars simply because human hearts are breaking. Far across the dark Atlantic, the Carpathia drove forward at full speed. Captain Arthur Rostron pushed his ship harder than ever before. Extra lookouts stood watch. Steam roared through the engines. The bow crashed through icy swells. Every mile mattered. Every minute mattered. But 60 miles remained an immense distance in 1912. The Carpathia raced heroically toward Titanic. The terrible truth was, she was racing against time itself. And time was winning. The rescue and the legacy of Titanic. By 1:30 in the morning, April 15th, 1912, there was no longer any doubt. Even the most optimistic passengers could now feel it. The deck beneath their feet no longer rested level. Walking required effort. Loose objects slowly slid toward the bow. The cold air seemed sharper than before, carried across an ocean that had already claimed the forward half of the ship. Titanic was dying. Not dramatically, not quickly, but steadily. Like a great cathedral slowly settling into the earth. The forward well deck had already disappeared beneath the Atlantic. Sea water climbed staircases that only hours earlier had echoed with polished shoes and cheerful conversation. Elegant corridors became rivers. The magnificent mail room vanished beneath black water. The squash court disappeared. The lower decks surrendered one by one. The ocean moved through the ship with relentless patience. Water possesses no emotion. It simply follows gravity. Captain Edward Smith continued moving across the boat deck. Witnesses remembered him helping where he could, ordering crew members to continue loading boats, checking on passengers, looking toward the darkness where no rescue ship yet appeared. One cannot help imagining the weight upon his shoulders. More than 2,000 people, one ship, one impossible responsibility. History has debated his decisions for over a century. Yet in those final moments, debate meant nothing. Only action remained. The lifeboats continued leaving. Some now carried nearly full loads. Others still departed with empty seats that could never again be filled. Crew members worked furiously. Ropes creaked. Wooden boats descended toward the freezing Atlantic. Women clutched children. Husbands remained behind. Parents kissed sons. Brothers embraced sisters. Some promised, "I'll see you in New York." Neither believed they were lying. Hope often survives longer than reason. Thomas Andrews refused every opportunity to save himself. Several survivors later recalled seeing him moving rapidly through the ship until almost the very end, helping passengers, urging them upward, throwing deck chairs overboard so people might cling to them later. One account places him standing quietly inside the first-class smoking room near the end, staring at a painting above the fireplace. Whether every detail is historically exact remains uncertain. Trauma often blurs memory. What is certain is that Andrews never entered a lifeboat. The man who had designed Titanic chose to remain aboard her. He was 40 years old. At approximately 1:45 a.m., the final lifeboats prepared to leave. There were now very few places left. Crowds gathered around the remaining boats. Officers struggled to maintain order. Remarkably, they largely succeeded. There was fear, there was confusion, but there was no complete collapse of discipline. Many passengers stepped back voluntarily. Many crew members remained at their posts knowing full well what that choice meant. Courage rarely announces itself. Sometimes it simply refuses to move. Below deck, the engineers continued working. Perhaps no group aboard understood their fate more clearly. Maintaining electrical power required steam. Steam required engineers. As long as the generators remained alive, lights illuminated corridors. Wireless operators could continue transmitting. Crew could continue organizing evacuation. Every additional minute mattered. Those men bought time with their own lives. Nearly all of them perished. The lights remained on almost until the very end because they stayed where duty demanded. History often celebrates famous names. It should never forget the engineers. In the wireless room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride refused to stop transmitting. Again and again the messages crossed the Atlantic. SOS. CQD. Position. Urgent assistance required. Nearby ships answered. The Carpathia continued racing toward them. The Olympic acknowledged the distress. Other vessels responded from even greater distances. Each answer brought the same terrible reality. Too far. Too late. Around 2 a.m., the bow sank dramatically lower. The angle became impossible to ignore. Passengers climbed uphill toward the stern. Deck chairs slid forward. China shattered inside dining rooms. Pianos shifted. Furniture broke loose. The Atlantic poured into spaces that had remained dry only minutes before. The great ship groaned. Steel protested. Rivets strained. One survivor later compared the sounds to a living creature in pain. Perhaps that comparison feels strangely appropriate. Ships often become more than machines. People live within them, work within them, dream within them. They acquire personalities, names, memories. Loss feels personal. The musicians continued playing. What was their final piece? No one knows with certainty. Many survivors believed it was "Nearer, my God, to Thee." Others remembered different melodies. Memory fractured under unimaginable stress. What matters is not the exact song. What matters is that they played it all. 8 musicians. No obligation. No expectation of survival. Only quiet determination to offer comfort while civilization itself seemed to dissolve around them. None survived. Then came the final boats. Collapsible lifeboats were hurriedly prepared. Some launched successfully. Others did not. Time had almost disappeared. Water now reached the base of the bridge. Captain Smith reportedly released the wireless operators from duty. "You've done your duty." Every sailor understands the meaning of those words. There was nothing more anyone could reasonably ask. Harold Bride escaped. Jack Phillips did not. At approximately 2:17 a.m., something changed. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then steadied. Passengers looked upward. Electricity had become so ordinary during the voyage that few had considered what darkness might mean. The engineers below continued fighting. Steam pressure fell. Generators struggled. Then, the lights failed. Completely. For the first time since her launch, Titanic disappeared into darkness. Only the stars remained. The Atlantic suddenly felt infinitely larger. Without electric light, the great ship became a black silhouette against an even blacker sea. Witnesses later remembered an extraordinary silence lasting only a few seconds. Then, the sound began. Steel bending. Metal tearing. A deep, thunderous roar unlike anything most had ever heard. The immense strain became too great. The bow, already filled with thousands of tons of seawater, pulled downward with irresistible force. The stern rose high into the air. Almost impossibly high. People clung desperately to railings. Some slid toward the sea. Others jumped. Many prayed. Many simply held one another. Then, the ship broke. For decades, historians argued whether Titanic had split apart. Modern exploration of the wreck has confirmed that she did. The enormous hull separated into two great sections. The bow plunged downward. The stern briefly settled back before rising almost vertically. For one haunting moment, the ship seemed to point toward the stars. Then gravity completed its work. At approximately 2:20 a.m., April 15, 1912, Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic. She had survived only 2 hours and 40 minutes after striking the iceberg. The silence afterward proved almost unbearable. Where moments earlier stood the largest ship in the world, there was now only darkness. Then came the voices. Hundreds of them. Men, women, children, calling for help. Praying. Shouting names. The water temperature hovered around -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to kill with terrifying speed. Most people immersed in that water lost consciousness within 15 to 30 minutes. Many far sooner. Several lifeboats hesitated to return immediately. Their occupants feared being overwhelmed by desperate swimmers. It remains one of the most heartbreaking moral dilemmas in maritime history. Eventually, lifeboat number 14, commanded by 5th Officer Harold Lowe, returned. By then, the voices had largely fallen silent. Lowe rescued only a handful of survivors. The Atlantic had already taken the rest. More than 1,500 people died that night. Hours later, just after dawn, another ship finally appeared. The RMS Carpathia. Captain Arthur Rostron had driven his vessel through dangerous ice at maximum speed. His crew prepared blankets, coffee, soup, medical supplies, extra berths. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the Atlantic, Carpathia reached the lifeboats. Survivors climbed aboard. Many looked back toward the place where Titanic had vanished. Nothing remained. No funnels. No smoke. No floating palace. Only scattered wreckage. And an ocean so calm it seemed incapable of what it had done. Among the rescued, emotions proved impossible to describe. Relief. Shock. Grief. Disbelief. Entire families had disappeared. Children searched faces hoping to find parents. Husbands searched for wives. Friends called names into empty air. Many survivors later said the silence felt worse than the sinking itself. Because silence meant certainty. When Carpathia reached New York on April 18th, tens of thousands gathered along the piers despite pouring rain. Newspapers had already spread the unimaginable news around the world. The unsinkable ship had sunk. The greatest engineering triumph of the age had lasted only one voyage. Crowds waited in absolute silence as survivors stepped ashore. Some found waiting relatives. Others found no one at all. The world demanded answers. British and American investigations began almost immediately. Questions echoed across both sides of the Atlantic. Why so few lifeboats? Why maintain speed despite ice warnings? Why had nearby ships failed to respond sooner? Why had wireless operators not remained on duty around the clock? Many painful lessons emerged. Maritime law changed dramatically. Lifeboat capacity became mandatory for everyone aboard. Continuous wireless watches became standard. International ice patrols began monitoring iceberg movements across the North Atlantic. Thousands of future lives have likely been saved because of those changes. Titanic's tragedy reshaped maritime safety forever. In 1985, more than 70 years after the disaster, oceanographer Robert Ballard and his team finally located the wreck. Nearly 2.5 miles beneath the Atlantic. The bow rested upright. The stern lay shattered some distance away. Between them stretched a vast debris field filled with ordinary objects. Shoes, dishes, eyeglasses, bottles, children's toys. Tiny reminders that history is never only about ships. It is about people. Today, more than a century later, Titanic continues to fascinate us. Not because she was the largest ship. She is no longer. Not because she was the most luxurious. Others surpassed her long ago. She endures because her story contains something timeless. Confidence meeting humility. Technology confronting nature. Hope colliding with reality. And above all, ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Some acted bravely. Some acted selfishly. Most simply acted human. Perhaps that is why the story refuses to fade. We recognize ourselves in it. Now, imagine the Atlantic once more. Not the frantic ocean of the sinking, but the quiet one that remained afterward. The stars still reflected upon its surface. The currents continued drifting south. Morning eventually arrived. Seabirds returned. The sea closed gently above the wreck as though nothing unusual had happened. Nature moved forward, as it always does. Far below, the great ship came to rest in darkness, where she remains today, slowly becoming part of the ocean she once crossed so proudly. And somewhere above those silent depths, ships still sail the same Atlantic. Their captains receive ice reports. Their lifeboats are ready. Their radios never sleep. Quiet reminders that history, though often written in tragedy, can also become wisdom. So, as the night grows quieter and sleep begins to settle gently around you, let your thoughts drift away from the panic of that final hour and return instead to the beginning. To a calm April morning. To Belfast shipyards echoing with hammers. To passengers waving from bright decks. To children chasing one another beneath towering funnels. To an age that believed anything was possible. Because perhaps the true story of Titanic is not only about how a ship was lost. It is about how every generation, no matter how advanced, eventually learns the same quiet lesson. Human beings can build extraordinary things. The sea, the stars,